Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I will call the August 16th Select Board meeting to order at 5:30. The only change to the agenda before we accept it is that the monthly town managers report is off. Otherwise, it's as written, and I will turn it over to Libby for announcements.
Thank you. First off, we are seeking feedback on our draft long-range transportation plan, and Transportation Program Manager Mike Burns is online, I believe. He's going to give a little update about it.
Thank you for that. If it's all right, I'll share my screen and just quickly run through just what's all within the long-range transportation plan and how the public can participate. For those who don't know, the long-range transportation plan is a federally required planning document updated every 4 years to guide the major transportation investments for at least the next 20 years. Every region of the nation is required to develop one of these plans to receive federal transportation funding. And we're wrapping up our outreach process, which concluded 3 rounds of public outreach the last few months for visioning, prioritization, and now we're in the public review phase that closes on August 21st. Here's just a tracking of the meetings that we've held. We will be holding 5 meetings on August 21st to complete the process. And again, a lot of the engagement was through the town of Nantucket's Zen City public outreach platform, which was extremely helpful. The site was used to collect responses to public surveys, share recorded presentations, summarizing each step of the process. And now it's being used to collect public input on the draft report and appendices. And just to participate, either scan the QR code on your screen now, or just simply go to the website, nantucket-ma.gov/LRTP. Just to briefly go over some trends that are noted in the plan. The year-round population has grown almost 40% from 2010 to 2020. The UMass Donahue Institute and Mass DOT projects about a 10% growth rate each decade through 2050, which is about the planning horizon for this planning document. That means that we'll be adding about 5,000 year-round residents over the next 30 years. The good news is that population is concentrated mostly within the middle of the islands, Bartlett Road, Fairgrounds, Old South Roads, with the major roadways that experience the highest volumes also in that same area along Milestone Road, a section of Milestone Road, Old South Road, and Sparks Avenue. The land use policy for the islands uses a town and country pattern of development, which is very good for transportation, as it encourages densities needed to support active transportation, such as walking and biking, because things are within proximity. And as I mentioned, the LRTP has been shaped to the public by the public through surveying during this outreach process. The visioning survey was conducted in May and early June, with the results shared at the end of June at the MPUC's June 26th meeting. The prioritization phase took place in late June through early July to gather input on planning tasks that would help implement the vision and the goals. So what did we hear? Who did we hear from during the surveys? Well, over 1,400 responses were collected during this outreach process. That was triple the response rate that we had just 4 years ago. This is mostly accredited to the use of the outreach strategy, our advertising of the process, and thanks to the community for actually engaging and participating in the planning process. So half the responses we received were from year-round residents, and we did have some categories that were higher representation than the island as a whole, and we'll try to get better with younger participants and participants who rent rather than own homes. So what did we hear? Most people either drive alone or walk frequently. They love the island's paths and safe travel, and again, proximity to things because of the town and country pattern of development. Concerns relate to congestion primarily, pavement quality, and issues traveling between the mainlands. There was overwhelming support for the policies described in the long-range transportation plan for complete streets, for safety, and for vehicle limitations. Respondents told us that they wanted more affordable or free bus service, as well as travel between the mainland, especially for vehicle transport. With respect to vehicle limitations, we provided a variety of limiting strategies in our surveying, and respondents told us that they would love to have vehicle space on the vehicle ferry, and that should be prioritized for local residents. Limiting vehicles through permits was also discussed in the past, and that's what we heard is still preferred through this outreach effort. We also heard that closing some streets to vehicle traffic and creating more of a pedestrian-only environment was also preferred. Again, respondents want more space for walking, biking, and using public transportations. Roundabouts and turning lanes were the preferred method for creating additional capacity at intersections. To be sensitive to the island, respondents told us to evaluate impacts to natural and cultural environment. So we'll keep doing that as part of the required permitting process. Respondents wanted transportation investments that reduced greenhouse gas emissions as part of the program of the improvements. Just to quickly go over the vision and goals and priorities for the plan. The vision statement is at the top. The goals are along the left-hand side. And the NPDC in the year 2044 would like to have a transportation system that is safe, reliable, accessible, and affordable with vehicle limitations, and that is sensitive to the island. The priorities to do this include improving accommodation for active transportation users using the complete streets principles. And as you know, the town does have a complete streets policy already. And also, as you know, the town has in their strategic plan a need to institute a parking management system downtown. That's also in this plan as a priority. Better incorporating or scoring projects based on natural and cultural impacts and emissions is going to be done, as well as development of a safety action plan over the next year. And affordability and reliability priorities will need to be better incorporated into the work program. A study of optimal vehicle capacity and regulation of the number of vehicles is currently not in our work program, and does not, I believe, align with the town's strategic plan. So that needs to be added as a task for staff time and for perhaps professional services. Moving on, there's a variety of capital project priorities noted in the plan. Since this is a federal funding plan, I'll note that federal funding for the region is definitely a challenge. For this planning cycle, there's about $1 million in federal funding available annually. That totals to about 19 million over the 20-year life of this plan. This is what's currently being shown is split amongst 3 different project types: intersections, complete streets or roadway projects, and then bike and pedestrian projects. These are, we show this as getting equal distribution of that funding rather than identifying specific projects. We do need to demonstrate physical constraint with this plan. And as you know, most of our projects are more than $1 million, so we're not able to actually program one for a particular year unless we can already demonstrate use of federal and state grant funds or local funds to make up the balance in funding. For transit and the transit program, long-range funding has generally not been provided beyond a 4-year time frame. So in this 20-year time frame, there's a lot of to be determines in the tables. The table at the top shows federal transit funding available with amounts used by the NRTA for operations. The bottom table shows the statewide funding that's used for capital projects. And over the next year or two, time does need to be devoted to updating the comprehensive regional transit plan to better clarify investment costs and available resources from federal and state grants, and perhaps even parking revenues. And quickly, We do a evaluation of projects to score them. Those use factors to evaluate a project area's condition, the level of mobility and safety in the corridor, as well as sustainability impacts. There's a variety of criteria that's provided that feeds into the scoring. I won't go into that now for timing reasons, but we also look at a project's readiness, and we use a scale of A to F to gauge the readiness of a project. A being that it's completely ready to go to construction. F, that it's just an idea and there's no funding available for that project. This is the priority list of roadway projects. This includes intersections and complete streets projects. What's shown in red here are ongoing projects. As you know, Newtown Road and the Surfside area roadways are being managed by town administration and DPW, are an ongoing. Pleasant Street and Williams Lane are also in the conceptual design stage. Regarding active transportation projects, the Mill Hill path is the #1 priority that's currently being managed by the Land Bank, and the other 3 projects, Sparks Avenue, Tom Nevers Road, and Walnut Road, are currently ongoing in design. Just note on the funding point that I made earlier, the entire listing of roadway and bike and pedestrian projects is right now at least $75 million in total for the total value of all of these projects. And as I mentioned earlier, we get about 20 million in federal funding. So there does need to be some identification of grants and local funding to make up the balance if this listing of projects is to be implemented over the next 20 years. For public transportation, again, the region's transit plan needs to be updated. Recommendations are briefly summarized here, and these include improvement or expansion of the airport route, which is very important for the Old South Road corridor, and a new Hummock Pond Road route. We've also have a listing of a fleet replacement with low emission vehicles, and improvements again are suggested to be paid for through grants and perhaps also through parking revenues. And just to wrap things up, the NPDC, as I mentioned, will have a meeting Monday, August 21st to close the public review. If you would like to participate, again, click, scan the QR code here, or go to the website address, nantucket-ma.gov/RTP. Scroll to the bottom to leave your comments on the plan. And Madam Chair, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share this with you all and the public, and look forward to your continued participation. I'm happy to answer any questions about this announcement.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a comment, a question.
Okay.
First off, Mike, I think it's great to see you've got paid parking in there, traffic modeling. I have a question about that. Cheaper free bus, island preference for the steamship, car limitations, all of those are great and a long term. 2 questions. First one is on traffic modeling. One of my concerns is if we look and we put a roundabout and all we do is move the problem 1 or 2 roads over, are we going to be able to look at that holistically and look at the whole picture?
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you. The other one, do you have a car count where we are? We used to do that. Do you know where we are now, peak summer?
I do not know how many cars are on the island at any particular moment right now. That takes some time in reporting from the Steamship Authority. I will use this opportunity to note that there is a vehicle census available through MassDOT's website. Just do something in the search engine about MassDOT vehicle census, and you'll be able to see the number of registered vehicles in Nantucket, and then their usage, which is so important. The critical data that you want from that is vehicle miles traveled, and that's really the one of the numbers that needs to go down is our use of our vehicles, how many miles we drive each day. You can look at those trends on that website through the vehicle census and see how we've been tracking in the wrong direction, and that we need to get better with how far we drive our vehicles every day.
Does that capture off-island vehicles?
It's for every community in Massachusetts has their own set of data. So you can look for Nantucket, compare that to Martha's Vineyard, compare that with Barnstable and any other community in Massachusetts. We're very fortunate that we have that dashboard available for the public to use.
I guess one more try. I asked it the wrong way. If someone brings a car from another state and it's not registered in Massachusetts, and will we know That same information?
Not that same information, no.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yes.
Thank you, Mike. Continuing on with the announcements, we are also seeking the public to participate in a survey with respect to the Nantucket and Madaket Harbors Action Plan. And on the website there's a link, and it's also link on the agenda. And I don't see, Dave is on. Okay. Dave Franzuto has an announcement about an upcoming forum in September that the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board will be holding. Dave?
Good evening. Thank you very much for putting this on the agenda. I also want to thank the board for giving us the opportunity to put the insert into the tax bill this past tax cycle to get the word out. The forum is on September 9th at 9:30 in the morning at the community room. And basically what we're trying to do is just raise awareness to the homeowners the importance of not overwatering and over fertilizing their lawns, and the damage that paint and oils and those types of things that go into the storm drain have on the effect on the harbor. This is an interactive website that was created. During the forum, there'll be Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board members there with computers and laptops who will be able to go on and look at individual properties as the participants want to look at what contribution their property has to the harbor. So we think it's very important. David Gray has agreed to help us with the presentation on his work with the storm drains and the sewers. So we're looking forward to it again, September 9th at 9:30 in the morning. And I appreciate the opportunity to inform the board and the public.
Thanks, Dave. Are no select board meetings the next couple of upcoming Wednesdays, Wednesday, August 23rd and Wednesday, August 30th for the summer schedule. And the next board meeting will be held on Wednesday, September 6th. Town offices will be closed on Monday, September 4th in observance of Labor Day. And that's it for announcements.
Okay, we don't have any follow-up listed from prior select board meeting tonight. Oh, yes, select board announcements and comments. Anybody? Okay, we'll have that at the end as well. Are there any public comments tonight for items that are otherwise not on our agenda for discussion? Come on up. 3 minute limit.
3 minutes per topic. Thank you.
Thank
Megan Perry. Thank you for taking this. It's fitting that the select board was talking about surveys just a minute ago, because I took it upon myself to do a survey amongst the community with a few other people. And we got signatures asking, well, I'll read it to you. It says, "We, the undersigned, request that the Nantucket Select Board terminate the memorandum of agreement between the town of Nantucket and the Nantucket Planning Economic Development Committee. The MOA creates divided government in which the Director of Planning, Land Use, and the town department head is bound to an employment contract with any PDC, a state agency whose authority is outside the town of Nantucket government. All town of Nantucket department heads should be hired and employed solely by the town of Nantucket, so that all town of Nantucket departments maintain their individual administrative, regulatory, and enforcement independence while being held to the same standards set forth by the town of Nantucket." So I thought, rather than do an online survey, we just went around and asked a couple of people to sign. So I haven't tallied it up. It's 10 signatures on each page, full pages there. I'm wondering if this is something that this board would consider putting on as an agenda item sooner rather than later, because clearly the community is interested in having that happen. The MOA, I don't know if all of you have read it before, can be terminated at any time by either party. So the select board is one of those parties that could terminate that. And I think that's something that obviously the community would like to hear a discussion about. So I'm asking if this board would please put it on as an agenda item to terminate the MOA. I also had another question when asking for signatures from people, just throughout the community, the vast array of people. I bumped into a few town employees that said they couldn't sign any petitions because they work for the town. Is that a policy that the town has, that town employees can't sign petitions? And if so, can I just see a copy of that? Okay, so that was the question. I'll wait for next week. And this MOA has been since 2012, so I think it would definitely be something that would be appropriate to revisit. I've seen a few emails requesting that through over the years. So that was my first public comment topic. My next one is, I had sent in a couple questions. Oh, do you want to start the clock again? Oh, okay, thank you. I had sent in a couple questions July 17th via email, and then I followed up with the board just to make sure the board all saw it and received it. I got a thank you for your email reply, but I didn't get any other questions actually answered. Do you want me to resend it? How should I go about asking those questions in the future? So that was my second topic.
I thought you did get answers, but go ahead and resend them.
Resend them to you. Okay, I can do that. My third topic is a question that probably will take a little bit to answer. I was just curious who directed the Affordable Housing Trust to discuss, deliberate, and vote on dropping the ZBA appeal with HAC. The select board oversees the Affordable Housing Trust, so I'm just curious, was that something that the select board directed them to do? And now, due to the actions of the Affordable Housing Trust, the Attorney General is looking into that specific meeting. And so I'm just curious who told them that they should be doing that. So those are my questions. We'll wait for answers. Thank you.
Come on up. And then I have someone online, but I'll take people I'll take people in the audience first. I'll take people in the audience first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this on, by the way?
Yes, just
Okay.
introduce yourself, even though
I will.
I know who you are.
I know I will introduce myself. My name is Rick Atherton. And I have a comment, really two questions, somewhat related to Megan's issue of her petition. And they have to do with who drafted the agreement between the select board, or at that time, the Board of Selectmen, and the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission. I think the drafter is an important element of that agreement. And I think it would be helpful if we all, including yourselves and members of the commission, were aware of who that was. My second question on this same subject is that, was that agreement reviewed by town council? And did town council write any comments that might be relevant for each of those, the board and commission, to understand the impact of the agreement they entered into? Specifically, I'd be interested in a comment on sections 5.3 and 5.4 related to the termination requirements that have to be met before termination can be effected. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Robert Bates online.
Good evening, Madam Chair.
Good evening.
The reason for my stopping in tonight is not what most would probably expect. The question I have, and it follows the tragedy in Hawaii. At one point, there were, in the last few years, warning sirens that were installed around the island. I know when they were tested, they were not really audible, and they were, I haven't heard a test ever since then. I'm wondering if there is a system that is in place for warnings for similar situations, tsunamis, fires, etc. And if there's something in place besides a warning system of sirens, which will not wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I know this is something that would have to go outside of the board this evening, but I would appreciate a response to that when you have a chance.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments this evening? The questions will be responded to. next time. Or in the email prior to that, since we're not meeting for a couple of weeks. I don't believe there's any new business. We have approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. If there's no discussion or changes to any of those, we could take it as one motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Select boards, reports and comments. This is a continued discussion of our November 7th special town meeting warrant articles and the adoption tonight. If there's going to be specific discussion about the short-term rental articles, I'm going to leave the table and have you do that first. And then I'll return to adopt the warrant or to discuss adopting the warrant. So I'm assuming that's the direction we're heading. So I will recuse myself. Yes? Okay.
I think that makes sense.
You want to do John's thing first?
So just for the public's information that town council's been working on some revisions throughout the week up until the fairly last minute. And so we do have, the select board received a
You gotta leave.
very most recently revised version. And I thought I'd invite town council to talk about first, John, the revisions that were technical in nature rather than substantive. If you wouldn't mind just running through those with us quickly. And then we can sort of move on to the more substantive comments and questions that are noted here from conversations with board members, et cetera. So
Okay.
version 2, the one that
Yes,
arrived.
would
at-
that be, could we get that? Would it be possible to get that up on the screen?
1 sec. That's the one.
And I'm sorry, if you can just give me half of it, 1 second, I need to get another, well, here it is, that's fine. So the Leslie Snell has reviewed the latest draft of the warrant articles, and she provided me some technical comments today. The first one is in Article 1. And for reasons which will be explained later, she's recommending the deletion of the definition of townhouse. It is really a technical amendment, and it's designed to make sure that the general bylaw regulations, which are in Article 2, are consistent with definitions contained in the zoning bylaw. So that's the first change. That is technical in nature. If we could go to Article 2. Yeah, we're just changing, we're just adding the reference to Article 2 of the warrant. And that's in the section that basically says the zoning amendment doesn't take effect unless Article 2 is passed. If we could continue scrolling down. Keep going, I'll go back to that one. Again, a recommendation from Leslie is to delete the definition of apartment. If we could keep going down. And the definition of townhouse that was in the general bylaw as well. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. In subsection M, there was a typo, which we have now corrected. We've changed the reference from K to L. That's a technical change. Keep going. Same thing, we had to renumber section O. It was mislabeled section N. And that's it. Well, let's keep on going. That's it with sort of the technical changes. If we could go back to the top now.
Okay,
Brooke,
John,
Yes,
I'm going to interrupt you at this point, if you wouldn't mind, and I'm going to ask Jim Salzer to come to the mic. Jim was a member of the short-term rental work group, and he was ill with COVID on the evening when we offered the opportunity for each of the members of the work group to take 3 minutes to talk about their experience. And Jim asked me for that opportunity tonight, so I thought I would invite him to the mic.
Jim Sulzer, former at-large member of the STR work group. First, to set the record straight, in our group, we had 9 voting members. 2 of our 9 members currently operate in STR. That hardly seems enough to characterize our group as a, quote, fight that is being waged by special interests, as alleged in a letter sent out this week to Nantucket voters. STRs, they can be anything from a commercial megalith that none of us like to a modest family enterprise that helps with a monthly mortgage. In full transparency, here's my story. My family owns a small bungalow next to our main house, and for 21 years, we rented it year-round to the same couple. By 2012, when the couple decided to leave the island, our 3 children were growing up, they had spouses or partners, and our main home wasn't large enough to hold everyone for the holidays. We decided to turn our small bungalow into a summer rental. Back then, no one knew the term STR, so it could be available to our overflowing family in the off-season. We rented it as an STR for 8 years until 2021, when we stopped in anticipation of a family member with an illness being able to come home and live there. After numerous delays, that may come to pass this fall. That heartfelt hope has been our special interest. I'm sure many other families have to deal with considerations like these, making extra money to pay for a relative's medical care, or alternatively shutting down an STR to bring an aging parent home. The personal and the public often intersect in the STR world. Back to our STR group. From the beginning, we've been blasted from certain quarters for being biased. I don't see it. I joined the group with an open mind, and I believe most of the others did too. Yes, there were representatives from 2 groups that had agendas, Act Now and Nantucket Together. Both have important arguments to make. I strongly support Act Now's recent project to help supplement year-round housing. On the other hand, I'm not a big fan of letters that accuse our group of undisclosed financial interests or try to prevent the public from seeing our proposals for themselves. The truth is, our work group represented multiple points of view. We had to negotiate and compromise a lot. It wasn't easy, but we found our way to a consensus of 7 votes out of 9 on our package of regulations. We believe they will help control STR growth and churn, eliminate new corporate STRs, and weed out commercial-only STRs legally and in ways that will withstand challenge. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. We learned a lot and changed, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so when we last had this discussion, the board members were sort of tasked with finding compromise or changes or things that if they wanted to propose changes to the proposed bylaws. And what this draft that we saw this afternoon includes some of the ideas that have come out of those discussions between meetings, between board members and town council and et cetera. So I thought, I'm not sure the best way to go here, whether to start with the board members and then have town council, Mr. Giorgio, explain how it's written, how the proposed changes are written in. The pleasure of the board on this.
We would just as soon have town council explain the changes.
Okay. Is that, does everyone concur?
That's fine. I can explain. I've spent a lot of time on this over the last couple of weeks. And the first thing I wanted to do was sort of understand there's 6 bylaw purposes. And I wanted to understand what those purposes would do to the various policies that were being brought forward. And so I asked those questions and I've gone through it and, a lot of it is really good. But what I've found is on some of them, I think they're cross purposes and that they are potentially harmful to those, to number 5, particularly to the goal of, retaining and increasing year-round housing. I think some of them are adversarial to that. So and that would be, where's my numbers? That would be numbers. And that's things like the 5-year, after 5 years, everybody gets 9. I think that's not necessary. I think the 60 days, a sign up 60 days after, I think creates a rush on the registry. And I think it'll end up having more people signing up. I think we could do it as of the date that we are, that it's approved. There's other items. Those are 2 as examples. I don't want to go into sort of every one, but I can, but those are 2 big ones. But I think the biggest issue still for me, and I think for a lot of people in the community, is putting a Y in the use chart. I could go into the details of why I think those and others are problematic. But I think in a couple different times, like 2 weeks ago, we were told, well, we might be a way to make a 2/3 vote. We'll link the 2. Well, today I was told, we were all told that that really isn't possible. Another thing that I thought was possible was putting an A in the use chart and then defining it. And I think that would go a long way, along with a couple other small changes that would help, year-round housing, year-round people. I think that would go a long way to passing this at town meeting while still, honoring and, and following, I think, the good work that was done. Because there was a lot of it. I think defining it as 4 rentals over the course of summer was genius. I think that is kind of the traditional use that we've had, and I think that, and I think the numbers bear that out. There's very few people that rent for a lot more than that, but I think that, so anyway, I think, but I feel a little bit like, so I thought that was a way to do that. And again, today that changed and that, last minute that changed, we can't do it. I feel a lot like Charlie Brown with Lucy pulling the ball up from under me. I think I've got something, I'm about to kick it and then the ball's gone. And so I'm really torn on how to proceed. I don't think we, getting into the, could this, and the other big problem I still feel is if we bring something that is the least restrictive, there's not going to be any changes. Things I'm talking about are not going to be able to be changed, on town meeting floor. We're not going to be able to make those changes. So we really are bringing another up and down article again, which I feel, I believe will not be successful, but I think that we're really close and we could bring an article that would succeed. So I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not sure how to broker that. I thought that, I thought I was getting there and now I feel like it's completely back where we were 2 weeks ago. So I don't know how to proceed. I don't know what the options are. If 2 of us vote against it and 2 are for it, is not, is it on or is it off? Or is there a way to try to fix it, get some of this figured out so that we can all vote positively for it? Or is there a way, or will it happen during the hearings? I don't know. So anyway, it's.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Tom, did you want to? So my thought is, one of the things that I've come to understand about, that I always understood about town meeting process, but how it applies here is that amendments on the floor cannot be more restrictive in nature than what's in the warrant article. So these areas that I've been referring to in my head as tweaks to the proposed warrant articles, I've been feeling like there might be some things where we could make it for lack of a better word, more restrictive from that perspective, and then give town meeting the opportunity to turn it back to the original proposal if that's what the majority wanted to do during the debate at town meeting, so that it would give more opportunity for town meeting to weigh in on some of the details than as presented. So that's kind of where I've been thinking on it. And I'm curious if Malcolm or Tom have any thoughts on that direction.
I would just be interested in what specifics you're proposing.
So that's the meat of the thing. I think what I want to do is talk in principle first, and then we can sort of get down to nuts and bolts. Tom, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's a pretty good idea. That's a similar situation to what we did with the a la carte options. Like the community impact fee has to be separate per town council, and the way it's a different mechanism. But some of those provisions, that two specifically that Matt mentioned, and then to your idea, making them one thing and then having them optional to go back to the regular proposal seems like a pretty good idea. That gives the voters the most options possible.
Okay. So having heard from all of you, I think what I want to do next is I want to ask John to address the question of Article 3, because this, and Erica, if you wouldn't mind bringing it back up, please. I'm trying to whittle my way around
That's a good one to get rid of.
from the legal, the things that have changed because of legal circumstances that are sort of not our choice really anymore, to the things that are the choice of the four of us. So John, could you explain your proposed deletion of Article 3, please?
Yes, there's been a lot of discussion about whether Article 3 is going to create a situation where the town would be susceptible to a legal challenge, because there is a view that carving out a special exception for folks who reside in the premises more than 6 months out of the year, whether that's a unlawful restriction on interstate commerce. And and also I think the question is whether or not it's going to create sort of I'll call it a distraction at town meeting. And so I've looked at all the case law. I've actually spoken to the Attorney General's office. And while the Attorney General has not specifically ruled on this kind of a provision, I do think that it is more likely than not that the town would be, that this provision would be challenged as a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause. And so I think it's important to think about whether it's prudent to proceed with Article 3, given the legal uncertainties. On balance, my recommendation is that you not go forward with Article 3 at this special town meeting. It may be something that we could change at a later date through a general bylaw amendment, assuming that Article 2 passes. Now, the counter to that is Article 3 has been separated out. That was the recommendation of the short-term rental work group. So it's a standalone article, and it's not included in most of the regulations that are all contained in Article 2. So I think we could proceed with it at this town meeting. I think it would more than likely engender a legal challenge. Most of the cases that have found this problematic, most of them are coming out of the Fifth Circuit, which, as we know, is a very conservative circuit. I don't think there's any clear guidance as to what the First Circuit, which is the circuit that Nantucket is in, how the First Circuit would view this. And we do not have any definitive word from the Attorney General.
Thank you, John. I have a follow-up question to that, because I believe, and Tom, you can clarify or correct me if I'm wrong. The intention of this article was to provide protection for people who live here year-round to rent at the higher level of 9 contracts, year-round defined as 6 months and a day. As with the goal of making sure that acquiring a home for someone who lives and works here, if they need the short-term rental income to afford that home, is protected. Does that sort of, I'm getting some head nods from the former
Yes.
members of the group. So my follow-up question is there a mechanism, assuming this would be deemed unconstitutional, what mechanism, is there a mechanism in what we have before us that would allow us to provide protection for that category of people in a way that wouldn't be deemed unconstitutional under the interstate commerce question that, and that's for you, John.
Okay, Brooke, if I may, so it's important to realize that this, I'm going to call it residency provision, although it strictly really isn't a residency provision, but this would only apply, first of all, to members who, residents who have purchased a home after the effective date of the bylaw.
Right.
Right? And so as it stands now, in Article 2, if I were to purchase a home in Nantucket after the effective date of this bylaw, the change of occupancy for me, if I had a short-term rental, would be 4 times during July and August. The intent here is to allow residents who, or I should say new owners, who reside on their property at least 6 months out of the year, 6 months and 1 day, they would have the benefit of the 9 changes in occupancy from the get-go. So that's the difference. If you do not include Article 3, it's a difference basically for new homeowners. It's the difference between 4 changes in occupancy and 9 changes in occupancy, which applies to everyone else. That is existing short-term rentals. No, I should say properties that are currently owned by an individual engaging in a short-term rental.
Right. So there is a hardship provision, and my technical question is, where does hardship get defined in this process? Is it a policy, or is it have to be in the general bylaw? Some definition of it.
It really, I don't think you can define it, Brooke. You know, but I believe what we have in here is the ability of a board appointed or appointed by the select board. It could be the Board of Health, it could be someone else, can grant a hardship exemption, which is similar, for example, to a Title V variance based upon a hardship. It's not something that you can really sit down on paper and define. And I don't think that the availability of that hardship exemption would cure any perceived constitutional violation.
Brooke, my thought is the hosted stays is helpful for
Yep.
year-round people, and I think the hardship is helpful because, and I think we want to treat people the same as much as possible. We want to treat categories the same. I know the state allows us to have categories slightly different. But I think the more we can treat them the same, the better we're going to be. I would be fine with taking this out, although I think the intent is admirable and is a good intent, but I'd be fine with this removed.
Malcolm?
I understand the legal implications of this because I actually like Article 3 to a sense because it's probably one of the one things in this whole package that I actually support because I want to make sure that it's local residents who need to rent their place can rent their place, and we don't have a lot of commercial establishments, whether they be corporate or private. So boy, you really put me in a bound here.
Sorry.
I'm sorry about that, but because I'll be honest, and I've been very clear, I've had trouble with other aspects of this whole these whole bylaws and zoning laws, so.
If I may, Brooke,
Yes, John, go ahead.
so you always have the option of putting it on the warrant. And then based upon input from maybe the finance committee, the planning board, the general public on the run up to November 7th, you always have the option to move to pass over this article.
Okay.
If you take it off, it's off for the town meeting.
Madam,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Giorgio. John, I understand there's some new case law possibly kind of evolving in this area. Is this kind of where your recommendation is coming from?
Yeah, the more, as the weeks have gone by, Tom, more and more cases have come out. And I know Kathy Barrett had cited a case out of the city of Austin, Texas, where a short-term rental bylaw that favored residents was deemed unconstitutional. But again, there's not any clear guidance in the First Circuit. It's actually something that could very easily go to the Supreme Court, I think, at some point. But if you look at the body of decisions that have been rendered to date, and of course, prognosticating this is a thing lawyers should never do and is very difficult. I do think there's a better than 50% chance that this provision could be subject to a successful legal challenge. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is if it is enacted, it goes to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General is going to weigh in. And if she finds that this is a violation of the Commerce Clause, she would likely disapprove it, or at least render a very strong caution. And that's the reason why it's been separated out. One of the reasons it's been separated out into a separate article.
Malcolm?
Madam Chair, as I think about this, I'm sort of in a unique position because I have trouble supporting Articles 1 and 2. So if I don't support Articles 1 and 2, I can't very well support Article 3 because Article 3 can't really stand alone without Article 1, for example.
That's correct.
That is true.
Yes.
That is true.
So therefore, if it's the wish of the board to remove Article 3, then I can't object to that.
Yeah, I think it would be imprudent of us based on town council's opinion and greater than 50% chance that it would maybe found unconstitutional due to the Commerce Clause for us to put this on the warrant.
John, if I could ask a question, should the rest of this framework pass? And the case law gets established around short-term, becomes more established and clear around short-term rentals. We would have the option at town meeting to enact a form, some change to the bylaw that would try to achieve this goal based on the evolved case law over time that, perhaps created an opportunity to do so.
Yes,
Because of the way it's structured. in
yes,
general bylaw.
correct.
Okay, all right. I think for me, it's really important for the community, particularly the year-round community who aspire to homeownership, to understand the legal complexity of this decision. It is, to Malcolm's point, it is an admirable goal of the work group, to care about and try to protect the ability of year-rounders who are not yet homeowners to be able to afford to do so in the future. That's certainly a priority for me. So I'm really disappointed about where the case law is going. But I think I concur with Tom that it feels imprudent to put something on that is so likely to be open to legal challenge, both from a town resource point of view and but I stand with the fact that it's really disappointing to me.
Absolutely agree.
So does the board want to take these sort of changes one by one and agree to them by consensus, by motion? I'm not sure legally, John, procedurally, what should we be doing here? We're working with a draft. Is consensus adequate in terms of making changes?
If there is a consensus, yes. If there's a split vote, then we're gonna have to deal with that. But you could certainly, I mean, it's on the warrant now. You control the warrant, so this board could certainly make a decision to remove this article from the warrant.
So do we want to act on this question first? Does someone?
I'll make a motion to remove it.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I know it's a bummer. Other than that, okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. So that's one decision down. Congratulations. Okay. Matt, did you have another one specifically that you wanted to bring up, or shall I have John run through them as they're drafted here?
Well, I think the ones I was L and M, the five L of I think it's Article. The two
Article
is the-
2.
The main one. And there's in a couple of these, I think, you know, the 5-year sunrise is what I call, I think if it's still numbered L. Is that, let me see.
It's L, that's correct.
So it's the last line of.
Yeah, the
section L.
limitation of 4 changes. This is one that I think does hurt housing. And the reason I came around to that is, you know, you buy a house and you are fixing it and you live there with your family for a year, and then you're fixing it and you spend a lot of money and you get it all ready. And then the 5 years are up and you can rent it full time. You got the full 9. So I think the incentive is still there to transition to something different than what we would like to see. And I think that's the same with M, which is the 60-day look forward. I think it's pushing people to, you know, to sign up on the dotted line and start having these plans because, oh, I can do this now. And so those are all things that I think harm the, you know, retention or creation of housing.
Okay.
And I think they're opposite sort of what the work group was trying to do, you know, in number 5.
So in the interest of focus,
Well, in the number 5 of their draft bylaw purposes, number 5, I think these were opposite, you know, in conflict. I understand why they did them, but I feel like they're in conflict with the overall attempt.
so in the interest of trying to remain focused, are you comfortable taking them one at a time, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure, Erica. Well, actually, that's the big one I think we should hold. I'm inclined to hold that one. I want to go, hang on, sorry. I think the next one is
I think we're down to purposes and intent.
Go back up a little, Erica, please. Okay.
If I may, real quick.
Yep.
Matt, on your comment on how you feel about those two provisions, I would just kind of note in general on the work group's work
Mhm.
that, and I know you know this, but just in general, we had to find consensus. I completely, in a lot of ways, agree with you, but to get anything to get through our work group to finish their work of, again, 10 minutes of work. I know everyone knows that, but this is what we settled on. So I know we're kind of in another stage, but I just wanted to go back and say that I think there are members of the work group that are very sympathetic and totally on board with that, but that's not where we weren't going to get to 7 to 9 if that was the case.
No, I understand.
Um,
But the question I have is, are we gonna, if we take these away, can they get added back in? Cause they're less, they would be, we would be making it. So we take away the sunrise, can someone add the sunrise in? I guess that's less restrictive, so they could try to do that. We could try to amend that.
okay.
And the 60-day look forward is less restrictive. So if people felt strongly, they could try to put that back in again too.
So I think because Matt has raised those, Erica, I think we're going to start with those L and M, please. And take them one at a time. So, Matt, is there a specific proposal? If I'm hearing you to strike the last sentence on L?
Yes. Yeah.
Starting with the limitation. Yep. Okay. So any comments from the board on this? Other than Matt's initial?
Madam Chair, as I recall when we discussed this before, the concept of the limitation of 9 rentals or 4 rentals, the work group thought that would slow down the growth of short-term rentals. But if you looked in the press's first information and their statistician when he was here, said that would only slow it down a very small percentage, as I recall.
So I'm going to ask Matt Haffenreffer from Process First to clarify, or let's try to figure out what he said and how you interpret it. Malcolm,
Sure.
make sure we're clear.
Matt Heffenreffer, data consultant on the short-term rental working group. So I think there's a couple things we're combining in what you're saying right now. One issue was looking at the current platform-based rentals to understand what percent of contracts that were executed during peak summer would have been, in other words, invalidated if there were a limitation of 9. And that was the small number. And I
Right.
think what we said is if we projected roughly with NARAB private listings and the platform, we thought that 5% of contracts wouldn't have been enacted at the home that they were enacted at. That doesn't mean to say that they wouldn't have filled out another home or that fewer people would have been on the island. It's just to say that there were 5% fewer contracts in the homes that were above 9. So that's really specific to how much each home was used, which is one purpose of 9, is to limit the amount of turnover in the peak season. I think that's a different thing than figuring out how many homes are in short-term rental. Yeah.
So if I can clear, that is the change from unlimited to 9 would result in a small change.
Correct.
So what we're talking about here is the change from unlimited to 5 on new.
4.
4. I cannot get 4 in my head on this.
5 is years.
I
5
know,
years.
5 years for the shift from unlimited to 4. Do you have any sense of the impact of that from the data we have?
So the way I think I can best explain the purpose of the first number, the 4 versus the second number, the 9, is 9 is going to be applied to homes that are currently rented. And it provides an overall limit to both the turnover and the max number of contracts during the peak season. So it will limit homes that turnover, let's say on average, more than once a week, because there's effectively 9 weeks in a summer. And it will also provide sort of an upper limit on how much money someone could make during the summer. If indeed they were using a lower than 1 week average rental. The first number 4, I would look at differently, as 4 is for new rentals. In other words, rentals that are new to the market. And I think the 4 determines how profitable it is to be in the business of renting that home. If I can only rent 4 times on a new home, I'm less likely to make money. I will make less money than if I could rent 9 on average, because of course some rental contracts are longer. But to me, that's the purpose of the 2 values. And so we didn't try to guess what would be the impact of 4, because that only applies to homes forward. It is not applied to homes that are currently being rented. So it's not going to change the current market. It changes the future of the market by limiting the value, the value to a new STR owner of being able to rent only 4 times in the summer.
So Matt, if I could just interrupt for a second, the limit on 4 is only for homes that are purchased after the effective date of the bylaw. So if I own a home now, and this bylaw passes, the limit for me is 9. If I already own a home and I sell it to somebody else, their limit goes down to 4.
Yes.
Yes and yes.
So as I understand it, the idea being that a limit of 4 contracts is a financial disincentive to acquire a home just as an investment short-term rental. Right? And so as I understand Matt's proposal to strike what we lovingly call the sunrise clause of that limit of 4 contracts only exists on a new short-term rental for 5 years, and then it goes to 9.
And I'm saying.
Unless we
and I'm-
strike that.
And I'm saying strike that.
Yep.
And keep it at 4.
And that would give town meeting the opportunity to put it back
They could try to put
if
it
they
back in.
wanted to make it less.
Yeah, because if we put it
restrictive.
in, we can't, if we left it as it is, you can't go backwards because it's more restrictive.
Right.
So
So-
that would be. The other thing I think people have to think about is that this is not, isn't a lot of, we didn't really consider how much more is being added. You know, we did look at like how many homes, how many of the new homes that are bought by, under a certain dollar amount, above a certain dollar amount, what percentage of those, which is the lower amount is more likely to go to regular people, sort of regular people, the other amount isn't, and what percentage of those are short-term rental or not. So we're still going to be adding, as we lose some rental stock, we're still going to be adding rental stock every year. Now, you can't predict, you can correct me, Matt, but you can't predict exactly how many we're going to add every year or exactly, what percentage and how it's going to go. But there is an additional number that's going to be added to this. But it's going to be at 4, not at 9.
Tom or Malcolm?
Okay.
On this question. The other thing I keep kind of harping on this is that with the framework we have, if we find the growth of the number of short-term rentals is more than we want, this doesn't achieve the goal of restraining the increase in the number of short-term rentals, this could be amended at a future town meeting to go to a smaller number of contracts to further disincentivize. So that's the framework we have in the general bylaw allows for that, correct? John?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes and no. I mean, if we still have the word grandfathering in there, we not be able to restrict it. Those properties may still be able to do 4, even if that's a limited number.
I'll ask for
So
legal.
that goes back to the grandfathering issue.
Okay.
Because essentially the grandfather what already is existing.
So
But that,
as
but
I
Malcolm, that
Yeah,
only applies, I'm sorry, that only applies if you have, if you're currently on the registry. Depending on which way you go with them, let's go with the way it's originally written. You have to have an existing certificate of registration before you are so-called grandfathered. So I wouldn't have a certificate of registration. I would buy a home after the effective date of the bylaw. I would apply for a certificate of registration and I would be limited to 4, notwithstanding the grandfathering provision.
But the homes that already had the restriction could continue, already had a certificate could continue.
So John,
It
if I
runs
may,
with the individ, I think it runs, the certificate of registration is issued to an individual, not to a property. I mean, it does apply to a property.
so John, let me ask you this. If we decided 9 was the wrong number and we've permitted 9 for all existing property owners, in the framework of a general bylaw, can that number be reduced and applied to all short-term rentals properties existing, even those who are quote unquote grandfathered under this current or this
Yes,
proposed bylaw?
yes,
So my understanding is the distinction between doing this in the general bylaw versus the zoning bylaw is that it is amendable and in essence, the grandfathering is revocable by a future town meeting.
yes.
And I would argue maybe.
Yeah, I would argue.
Maybe and kind of. And the reason I'm saying that is, I've had this with a conversation with John. We can't change from 9 to 0 to 5 to 22 to, if we go all over the place, we're gonna get challenged. And it's, people will challenge a zoning bylaw, but they'll also challenge a general bylaw. And if it isn't, in my take, and John, you can correct me if I'm off, my take is that if what you're doing is not reasonable, and what a reasonable person would find was a reasonable change, people can challenge that. And is that, am I on
Well, Matt,
planet Earth?
if you tried to go from 9 to 4 to 7 to 22, I mean, yes, that would be problematic in my view. But I would hope that you wouldn't change the 9 or the 4 unless you had some good data from maybe Matt indicating that the bylaw as originally enacted really didn't address the problem, or maybe it addressed it too much. So I would hope that there would be a rational basis for amending this bylaw in the future based upon the actual experience of operating under Article 2 for whether it be a year. It probably would have to be 2 or 3 years, I would think, before you'd really understand the trend and whether what you did achieves the goals in Section 1, the purposes in Section 1. There isn't a strict rational basis test for amending a general bylaw. There could be under a constitutional claim, and I really don't want to get into the weeds here too much, but there's some, there are equal protection clauses, there are the Equal Protection Clause, the Substantive Due Process Clause, all of which have been analyzed by the Attorney General in the context of the Great Barrington Bylaw. And she concluded that, the Great Barrington Bylaw was constitutional. But you could also potentially look in the future at going in a different direction, putting a cap on the total number of STRs that will be permitted in the town. It's all going to depend upon the data that you have as this thing is operated for a couple of years. This bylaw is in place for a couple of years.
And I agree with the rational basis, but I'm saying to sort of say, we can do whatever we want is my point. Is sometimes the argument is, we can just change this easily. We can just do this. If we don't like it, we can do that. No, it has to be, and it have to be fair to people. You can't take something completely away from them, and I think you have to, like he's saying, you have to have a basis, and there's commerce laws. You have, which is what one of the problems they're having in Texas,
Yeah.
in Austin. So
And my point wasn't to suggest that this could be all over the map, but that it is within the general bylaw, the grandfathering is not protected in the same way as it would be in a zoning bylaw
yes,
that runs with the property forever.
yes.
So a grandfathered short-term rental in zoning bylaw is always protected.
Yes.
So I wanted to make that legal,
Yeah.
point out that legal distinction. So.
Yeah, moreover, on the data point, I think that one thing that the short-term rental work group struggled with was that since the enabling legislation for short-term rentals has only been active in the state since July 1st, 2019, that there's very limited data for what's out there. And since the town registry isn't ready yet, and the town hasn't been taking that data, and also with Matt's process first, Yeoman's effort and NARAB's effort on gathering a bunch of data, we only had, we took 10 months, but it wasn't enough time to answer every single question. So I think that's something we struggle with, but maybe to town council's point that in a couple of years or a year or however long it takes to get a bulk of data, that a cap could be considered, or other amendments to the general bylaw. Also, Article 39, the Board of Health regulations were not around and are not being currently enforced. That's also part in this mix of that had been swirling around on this. So I very much agree, per what we've been advised per town council and Judy Barrett, the planning expert, on that the zoning bylaw subject to regulations in the general bylaw makes the most sense.
So I don't want to stray too far into zoning versus general bylaw. I want to keep us focused on this particular question that Matt's proposed, which is to strike the sunrise clause from 4 back to 9 after 5 years. And I want to circle us back to that particular item and see if there's now consensus, or do we want to make that change? How are we feeling about that? Matt, do you want to move that?
I'll move it and see where it stands.
Okay.
Move to remove it.
I will second that, given that it can be discussed on town meeting floor and could be pat back in if the majority, in this case, in the general bylaw, the majority feel that that's the right number.
Any further comment? Malcolm?
Well, Madam Chairman, I can support that particular tweak. And I'm still having trouble with the overall
Okay.
law.
I'm
I want to make that clear.
I'm
If I
trying to work them one at a time.
I
and then
know,
We'll, we'll see.
you haven't gotten to one that's going to be tough for
Okay.
me.
I agree. Saving the best for last. Okay, so I'm going to take a vote on this. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries unanimously. Okay, so that is stricken for the moment. Okay, and now we're on the provision of what is defined as someone who is eligible for the grandfathering, right? Have I phrased that accurately, John?
Yes,
In section M?
yes.
And it's, oh, wait, there's 2 M's in this version, John.
They're competing provisions. So M
Okay.
is the provision, the first M is shaded, is the provision that the short-term work group recommended. The one in the pink shade is the one that Peter Haley and Peter Kahn suggested as a way to address Matt and Malcolm's concerns last week, that there could be potentially a lengthy gap between the passage of the legislation in November and the effective date when it's approved by the Attorney General. So what the alternative language does is it does not rely as a benchmark obtaining a certificate of registration from the Board of Health. What it does is it says two things. One, any applicant for a certificate of registration has to submit proof that they have filed and are on the state registry. That's number one. Prior to November 7th. And two, and this is the part that gave me pause, two, that the state registered STR unit engaged in more than 4 changes of occupancy during the high season in any 1 year from January 2019 to November 2023. So how are we going to verify if someone is on the state registry that they were operating as more than 4 changes in occupancy during the high season from January 2019 forward? I think it's more of an enforcement question that I have. I would also want to tweak this language a little bit to make it consistent with the rest of the bylaw. If it's the board's wish to change M from the work group recommendation to this recommendation, I can certainly do that, but I would want to play with the language to make it consistent with the rest of the bylaw.
Comments from the board members or questions?
I think
Matt?
the definitions, some of the definitions, there's gonna be a whole heck of a lot of work still to go. Even if this goes through tonight and goes to town meeting, how do you define a single person? Who's gonna double check that it's a single person? Definition of corporate ownership, how do you ensure that you dig underneath that? There's a lot of sort of loopholes and operations enforcement stuff that I think is still to be figured out. This is not be critical of this group because they had a million things to think about, but I think there's still a lot that is gonna have to be figured out by staff and by Board of Health and, administration. I think, with a lot of help, so, and I think a data.
And Matt,
recommendations is a data.
I'm sorry.
Involved to help with some of that.
To
John?
that point, Chapter 123 already authorizes the Board of Health with the approval of the Select Board to enact regulations. And in fact, you've already done that with respect to some of the issues regarding the registry. So you're absolutely correct. This could be further refined by regulation.
And I'm bringing that up because it's, there's a lot of things that people are like, oh my God, this is wrong, this could be gamed, and this is whatever. That's gonna be, some of that is responsibility to figure out what happened later. But, they're right, because it is a concern, but, so I don't think it's what we have to deal with tonight. We're gonna have a hard enough time getting through it. But I just wanted to point that out, there's still a lot to be figured out, so.
And Madam Chair, to John, that's exactly why you suggested to put in the hardship provision, correct, John? What was that there might be some unforeseen things that needed to be adjudicated quicker than, say, another town meeting?
Yes.
Malcolm, any
We're
comments?
talking about grandfathering now?
We're talking about how do we define who is eligible for the protection of 9 contracts that's written into the proposed articles? So,
As outlined in them, we're talking about, yeah.
right, so
That's
who
fine.
is defined as having the right to continue at 9 contracts, right, John?
Yes, basically, that's correct.
See, the whole point of continuing really upsets me because we're essentially saying the commercial use in neighborhoods is still permissible. I'm not talking about corporate use. I'm talking about commercial use. Remember, there are almost 500 short-term rentals that are not owner occupied. Those are commercial use. And I don't think it's fair to neighborhoods that maintain the character of a neighborhood that we have those kind of properties around the island. So this, to me, you kind of move me along on some of these other provisions. But this is where I've been criticized before when I said nothing has changed. I think, yes, things have changed, but more so on paper than in reality. Having allowed short-term rentals to continue in a commercial sense does not change anything. Some of the provisions, for example, just having owning one property, for example, I'm not sure that's enforceable. Other communities have had difficulty enforcing that. So you haven't quite got me over the edge to support this. That's the way I feel.
Gotcha.
So the, Malcolm,
Hang
So
on.
I'm talking about that. I kind
Yeah.
of got a little out of them.
But I understand where you,
I mean, we are saying that you can still have short-term rentals as you've had before. And and for the people on this island that have to have them as part of their income, that's where we've failed to figure out a way to do that. I'm sorry, we've all failed on that. The rest of it is all commercial, and commercial enterprises should not be in residential neighborhoods, period.
John, did you want to add something? And then I have a question.
yeah, I just wanted to point out that the grandfathering excludes the requirements to comply with subsection L, which is the 9 and the 4 unit rental limitations. That is not, that's the only thing in this bylaw that is not grandfathered. It would apply to everybody upon the effective date of the bylaw.
Yeah.
In either the work group's version of M or the 2 Peters version of M.
So we have two questions. There is the question of whether we should protect existing short-term rentals at 9 contracts. And then we have the question of how do we define who's eligible for that protection? So I want to go to the latter first, and I have a question for Matt. If we don't have a short-term rental registration on Nantucket yet, we're going to find out soon that it is not, it's being delayed. So as a practical matter, it seems like the state registry is the one that's going to be available to us in November. So I think provision 1 of this change makes sense. My question is there information about the number of contracts through the state registry data so that we could determine the eligibility under provision 2?
No, I don't believe so. I think, so I think in the bylaws, it's written, and you'll need this town registration eventually, as well as the state. But I don't believe the state has all the information you need. And I think importantly, the state registry doesn't mandate the format or the completeness of owner information that you need for natural persons and the such. It really just determines whether or not you were in ahead of time. So what is your total universe of people that might be grandfathered in based on time? And then you have all those other characteristics or filters that you'd apply after that to figure out who's eligible. But those are really looking forward into the future.
And how many property, well, I know there's multiple dwellings and it's a little more difficult, but an estimate of how many existing short-term rentals are in the state registry?
And the existing dwellings
Registered.
registered.
Yeah.
I think the total number was 3,100 and we took it down to 2,500 on duplicates, I believe, off the top of my head.
Don,
I'm not speaking as a board member, but I have to point out that you are really seriously missing information. I've looked through the state registry And I can, off the top of my head, from my own personal knowledge, see so many rentals that are registered on there that are not active. So it's really skewing it in a way that's not real. And until we have the local registry set up and really have the proper data, there's going to be a lot of moving parts to this.
Yeah, if I have the numbers right from Matt, from the smart Matt, if I have the numbers right, it was 2,500 that were effective, but only like 1,800 were even renting recently. Paying taxes or renting recently. So there's, you might have 2,500 when you get the duplicates out, but isn't the number somewhat lower, quite a bit lower on the numbers that are actually operating?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is you guys are talking about two different things, sometimes interchangeably. One is how many homes could rent, and the number of homes that could rent is based on registered. And the amount of times they can register is based on, in this future state, are they a 9 or a 4? And that's your capacity for renting at any period in time. And that's very different than how many homes are renting or how many people are on the island in a short-term rental. And they're very different questions with different impacts on the community. And I think it's important to delineate which version and why you're speaking about very different impacts that you're trying to measure or understand.
Thank you.
Do we, quick before you leave, do we know the recent trends like we had up through last year? Do we have the recent numbers, and have you analyzed those through algorithms and things? Do you know that?
You're saying in regard to total registered?
Yeah, to be compared like the last few years, what is the trend? Has there already been a, uptick of people wanting to register because of all the discussions we're having?
Yeah, so I don't have any state registration numbers updated since we got that first pull of data back in April and May, I suppose it was. I think what had, there was that initial rush, which we didn't show on the first graph, the last package we included, because that was no one was signed up and we spiked to have people register. And then after that, there's been I think fairly steady rate of people signing up, and we broke it by quarter. There's some trends you tend to see over the course of a year, which aligns with a seasonal economy. But I think people are still registering, and because it's an ad-only database, that's where we're talking about capacity or number of registrations going up, which makes sense. You add them only, and we removed the ones that were duplicated. In other words, they were at the same address, so they certainly aren't the same. They're certainly referring to the same place, but that's different than how they're being used. And I think, over time, we'll see more people register who will use it varying amounts, and some will drop off. And in your registry at the town level, you can remove people because it'll be every year. You'll have to re-register every year. So it'll change that number, and you'll have a more clear number of how many people are renting in a given year or eligible to rent in a given year, and how many people are, because I believe you'll collect data that determines that, or that shares that rather. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Penny?
Hi, Penny Dye. It's not only an opt-in registry, it's free to register with the state. There are so many properties in there that have sold, they've devised to children by will. They no longer rent. And that's an important thing to remember, because it's really easy to sign up and it's free. It's like Hotel California. You can check in and never leave. Thank you.
So I'm wondering if provision 2 here, it sounds to me like the data isn't even available to be able to prove one way or another whether how many contracts someone has done between 2019 and 2023. I mean, provision 2 could just be and has collected and paid sales tax between 2019 and 2023, which would prove that the property was actively rented sometime, as opposed to full disclosure. I had to register because I let someone use my house for 9 days. That is not even a short-term rental by federal or state definition, but the state required me to register. So my home is registered, but I never collected or paid short-term rental tax. So to me, the criteria is proof of active rental history in the last 5 years gets you grandfathered. If you've been doing it, you get to keep doing it. If you haven't, then you're not protected. So I don't know how that feels to, I'm seeing some head nods from some of the members of the group. That feels like the intent of the revised M. I just don't know whether it comports with the intent of the short-term rental work group when they were trying to do this. John Giorgio?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brooke. So I was afraid that this was going to happen. I realized that in my inserting the alternate M, I included some additional language that actually was not in the proposal. The reference in alternate M to the town's establishment of the rental registration program actually should not be in there, but it begs the question. So I'm on the state registry. I have paid the excise tax on a short-term rental sometime after January 2019. I'm allowed to continue to short-term rental, but in accordance with what criteria? Am I subject to any provisions of this chapter? Am I subject to subsection K, but not the rest of it? That's why I thought this actually, while well-intentioned, I think it creates more problems than it solves. If you look at the short-term rental work group's proposed M, it says you have to have a certificate of registration from the town. Either on the effective date of this chapter or within 60 days of the town's establishment of the program. Well, you're going to hear later in this meeting that the rental registration program is probably not going to be established until January 1st at the earliest. And I don't think this bylaw is even going to be effective then, because it's only effective upon approval by the Attorney General. And I think it could take quite a while for the Attorney General to sort through all of these provisions and issue, hopefully, an approval letter. I think a much more realistic timeframe would be probably in the March timeframe. So as long as you have if the program goes live on January 1st, people will have 60 days to obtain a certificate of registration. And presumably in that 60-day period, the Attorney General will approve the bylaws so that probably in the March timeframe, people will know if they're grandfathered or not. But they're grandfathered with respect to whatever they get in the certificate of registration. And that's going to be up to the Board of Health to decide. We know that the limitation on 9 and 4 is going to be in place, even with grandfathering.
Here's my concern is the unintended consequences. If we say March, are there some people who are sitting who have no plans of doing this, but they go, well, if I don't do this, then I'm out. I better, is this gonna put incentive in place that people who are kind of on the edge and haven't really done it, just get in and sign up to make sure, and if that happens, how many will there be and where will they be and what will that impact be on other stuff? So that's why I was thinking a look back was probably a better way to handle it, but.
I'm going to go to Don and then Peter.
Hi, Don Holgate. I have a question about how this wraps into the 2024 season, because the reality of the situation is that before January, most rentals will be booked. And that's got to be recognized that people enter into legal contracts with tenants, and you can't sort of retroactively limit that when they've already made those commitments. So there's got to be some recognition on that. on how it's going to be handled.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
Peter?
Thank you, Peter Halley. I'll start here by saying, I think the idea on two that you put out there, which was registration, proof of registration on the state registration and proof of having paid sales tax is a good supplement to mine. As to the problem that Commissioner Holgate just put forward, I was thinking the same thing. There is a problem about the next season. And so I think what one could do is keep 1 and 2 with, as we've just described. And then I don't know, it's a 3 or whatever, but saying until the registry is established, any contract entered into before whatever the establishment date of the registry is going to be valid for the 24 season. And that basically, I think, wraps up in a nice bundle, having this restriction, which is basically aimed at avoiding unintended consequences and sort of having your cake and eat it too, because it will also have the unintended consequence of screwing up the 24 rental season.
So my question for Tom and the other members of the work group is, it felt to me like the grandfathering, the intention of the grandfathering was to protect the people who are already needing to short-term rent at the rates they're short-term renting in order to hold on to their properties. It's not for the person who owns a summer home who's never short-term rented to be protected into the future. So that this scheme, as described, which is show that you've already been doing it in a very definitive and provable way, is the protection, right? It's the protection of those who are already doing it to not unduly burden them financially by revoking their right to rent the way they've been doing it, and therefore be able to afford their home. So that feels like it's both honoring the intent of the work group and preventing the unintended consequence of a rush to registration for property owners who've never short-term rented, but would like to protect their right to do so, and with 9 contracts in perpetuity, as long as they own the home. So if I'm seeing some nods from the members of the short-term rental work group, comments from Tom, any comments?
Well, Jared, also, yes, it protects people who need the income, but it's also protecting purely commercial interests. And it's also, I think, agree with Matt, it will open a rush.
But there will be no rush because they will have had to pay. They will have had to have collected and paid taxes this year.
Because in fact, as a town registry, I have absolutely no hope that we're going to see one in a very long time, unless we just start all over again. That's another topic for later.
Okay. Do you concur that having the record of having collected and paid the excise tax as proof of actually having short-term rented
Yes, I think
prevents the
that's
rush to
an
registration?
excellent solution to defining grandfathering if you want to accept grandfather.
Okay. Caveat accepted.
I think it's a great suggestion.
Okay, all right, terrific. So, in principle, are we ready to act on this piece of the puzzle? Acknowledging Malcolm's not thrilled with the puzzle as a whole yet. Pleasure of the board.
Which are we, just so I'm clear, what are we voting?
So I'm going to put this in lay language as I understand it, that we are grandfathering the right to 9 contracts only. All other provisions of the bylaw apply except for the limit of 4 contracts on new homes. We are protecting the right to 9 contracts only to people who are registered to the state and have collected, can prove that they collected and paid excise tax between January 19 and the date of town meeting. And that's who's,
So that's what
that,
this will say when it's, yeah.
yeah, that's what I would like it to say, John. Can we make that happen? January of 2019, from the beginning of the registry. So there has to be a proven track record of short-term rental excise tax payment
Yeah, to November. of
since
this
the
year,
state registry's been in
In
existence.
each of those years?
No,
yeah. Either way.
anytime in those years. Anyone who short-term rented between 2019 and 2023, but it prevents new registrations being protected with the 9 contracts.
I'm sorry, there's something kind of important, Penny Dye, which is people are registered who rent for less than 14 days and don't collect or pay that tax.
They're not
Madam
a
Chair.
short-term renter.
John first and then Tom.
I don't believe they are a short-term renter.
Madam Chair, they have to claim the exemption on the state registry, as I understand it.
So that is not a history of short-term rentals because it's not a short-term rental by definition. So we're protecting people who have a history of short-term renting as defined by this state. So, thoughts, other comments? Kathy?
If you look at the definition of short-term rental in this general bylaw, the rental of property for a total of 14 days or less in any calendar year shall not be considered a short-term rental.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I just have one comment for John. When you turn away from the microphone. his
I'm
microphone-
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm saying that in the
Who's-
definition of short-term rental in the bylaw, it expressly states that if you rent for less than 14 days in any calendar year, you're not a short-term rental.
Thanks. Kathy?
It's Kathy Bear. Just a quick question in the going forward with the discussion and where the board seems to be here. One question I had is not in that part, but it's in the second to last line of Peter Halley's revision where it says inherited through a will or trust. I know that we had added a, family-owned S corp in previous paragraphs. I just wondered if those paragraphs should have the same language in them. Thank you.
John? John, you're muted. Kathy, I think.
No,
that-
I'm sorry. I'm not muted. I'm confused.
Oh, you're thinking, sorry. Permission granted to think.
Now, we should say in the will or the trust. Kathy, so an S corp has to have at least one person who's a natural person as a shareholder. And we dealt with that. We did add the S corp language in section I.
So that would apply here.
Yes. But so Brooke, but since I'm gonna have to draft this this elephant tomorrow, I need to have a bit more clarity. So I can change this to reference the state registry and reference the fact that you have to have paid the room's excise tax in at least one quarter, that is one calendar quarter between 2019 and 2023. I've got that. And then, I'm sorry, I'm turning away from the mic again. Give me a second.
Yes, and.
So then
and-
what, so let's assume I can show that. And I can deal with if you have a contract prior to the establishment or prior to January 1st for 2024, then you can rent without compliance with this bylaw, right? But let's assume, what am I subject to under those circumstances? I'm going to be subject to subparagraph L, which is the nine rental contract limit, What about the other provisions of this bylaw? Aren't I exempt from those provisions under the
No,
grandfathering?
It would be the same as was originally written in M, which is the only part you're exempted from is the restriction to 4 contracts.
No.
You,
No,
sorry.
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
The original M says that if I have a certificate of registration issued by the town, I can operate the short-term rental in accordance with that certificate. However, the provisions of M, the 9 and the 4, will apply, notwithstanding grandfathering.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I'm starting. Jim, please.
Thank you, Jim Sulzer. 2 things. First of all, to Malcolm's heartfelt points, I understand what you're saying. We did feel that the issue of fairness really was important for people who already owned STRs, and we didn't know how to distinguish between those who quote really need them and those who don't. But I do want to point out that in the Austin decision of just a few weeks ago, the federal judge reaffirmed the concept of retroactivity, which is if you have the right to, in this case, it was STRs. If you have the right to STR previously, it cannot be taken away by a subsequent change of bylaws or whatever. Anyway, that sort of supports our sense of fairness and how it had to be done across the board. John Giorgio did tell us if we tried to remove certain types of existing STRs and not others, like if we tried to remove existing corporate STRs, we would be subject to lawsuits. Now, I just want to, that's just one small point. The other point is what you're asking about, Brooke. Our understanding of grandfathering was, for instance, if a family owned 2 or 3, whatever, let's say 2 STRs, under grandfathering, they would continue to be able to operate those 2 despite the new regulations. The only new regulation that would apply to them was no more than 9 changes of occupancy in high season. And I want to be sure that as M is rewritten, and I really like your point about taxes doing it, I want to be sure that we don't lose, at least that was our original sense. And we felt it was fair. We all know people who might have 2 STRs. I'm not one of them. And they had built their family finances on that. And we felt that is unfair to take that from them.
I misspoke. Just.
And I agree with
understood.
that. I think, and also at this point, the number of commercial is not that high.
It is not.
The potential of it is incredible, you know, because it's happening around the country. But as we stand currently, it's not that much. And so I think that, you know, if some of them slip through now, in my mind, that's not the end of the world. But if we open it up to that, then I think we're in trouble. So I think that's, anyway.
Yeah, so the only way this really makes sense is if we say that if they meet those criteria, they can continue to engage in short-term rentals of their property, but they will be subject to, without complying with the provisions of this bylaw, except for L. That will apply.
It was the opposite of what I said, actually.
Yeah, sort of. Okay, no, that's good.
Okay.
I've got it clear now.
Okay, so now let's make sure the board, now that we've gotten here, and I think we all understand what we're saying and trying to achieve. One last comment from Peter Kahn. Just identify yourself. please.
Peter Kahn. I think there's just one clarification on that it was intended that the prior rentals, 9 or above 4, had to be during the high season of July and August. So the quarter that's being, the point is, it's not any quarter, it's that quarter. It's the quarter when John is talking about what you have to present. You have to present taxes that show in that quarter, July and August, that you had these prior rentals. You paid the taxes.
Okay.
So in the third quarter
It is.
of any one of those years.
Yeah, K is stricken and L is replaced. Oh, except for subsection L. We are wordsmithing by committee. Okay, there we go. Oh, okay, great. Matt, did you have a response?
Clarifying the availability of the data on that.
Okay, so the recommendation from Peter Kahn is that we're talking about limitations of rentals in high season. So the criteria should be have collected and paid rooms excise tax in the quarters that encompass July and August.
The third quarter.
That would be the third quarter
Okay, the third quarter. Thank you.
of any one of those calendar years.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So proof of a rental history during the high season between 2019 and 2023 gets grandfather, makes a property eligible for the grandfathering, an owner.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we're there. Pleasure of the board on this.
On this section, I'll move approval.
Just
on
this,
Yeah.
just this.
I'll move approval.
Okay, that I have a motion second.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's-
No,
Oh, 3-1. Okay.
Yes.
To be drafted. Yep. Thanks, Erica. Okay. So we're there. We're here. Okay, Matt, any others on your list?
There are, but one of the things that Malcolm's talking about is nine. At some point in an ideal world, I think everyone ends up at 4 someday.
Mhm.
You know, in my world, I would think that over 10 years or so, 15 years, you would do a real sunset and everyone would be at 4 and that would actually be a, and I would, so anyway, that would be one way to handle one of the things you're talking about, Malcolm. You know, if it actually did sunset from 9 down over time, so it's fair to the people who are doing it, they do it over time, and then, 10 years, 15 years from now, everyone's the same. That would kind of go to what you're talking about. Is that something that the group considered or no?
Anyone want to weigh in on the suggestion? Matt?
Oh, Matt Heffenreffer. So I'd weigh in on how I'd look at that from a measurement point of view, which is you're talking about basically taking the 4 and the 9. You're talking about just pulling 9 down. And I think as you get, have you guys voted to remove 5-year? Did that?
Yes.
So
Yes.
without a 5-year sunrise, you're adding no new 9s and without the exemption. And so over time, you're going to either pull that number down as you're suggesting to 4 or to some lower number, or you look at the rate of, how many rentals are happening, how full are they, tourism numbers. You have enough data to figure out what is happening. And at some point you'll have to decide, what do you want to happen specifically, tax revenue, visitors to the island, number of homes and how they're used as rentals, number of rentals, STRs and how they're used. And then you pull on that 9 up or down to achieve whatever you want. Setting that as like in the future number, I think makes it clear which direction you're intending to go. But you could move it anytime. You could move to change that number at any time. And I think what Matt's suggesting says at some point in time, we're intending to move this number down.
And the rationale I have for that is we're going to, over this time, say it's 10 years from now. My rationale is over that time, we're most likely going to be adding new homes that are going to still be adding 4 a year. And some of them won't do it at all. And some will, we don't know what the numbers will be. Some won't do it at all. Some will do it one or 2 weeks. Some will do it, whatever. And so I think that's, you would kind of want it, in my mind, you'd want it to be somewhat equal. So as you're losing them to sale and people never doing it, you're adding some on the new ones so that you still have, if it's 1,800 active, 15 years from now, if we, we're not going to have 1 million hotels, we still have 18 or 2,200, but you don't want to have 4,000. You know, so I'm sort of looking at it as how do you balance it? So it runs, you know, and so anyway, that's my thought process on it. When I look at the numbers, when I think about it, I say, how do you balance it? And in a way, it's protecting the existing. Because a lot of what I've heard is happening this summer with people is the B locations, the B houses, the C locations are struggling. And so I think that in some ways, that sort of thing is a little bit of protection for the existing, but that's.
Madam Chair, I defer to my former work group colleague.
Mr. Iverson.
Hi, David Iverson, former member of the work group and some other boards. We didn't discuss this. And I don't think I can really speak for the group on this, but I think my feeling on this is what we're really doing is just kicking the can down the road to the next generation. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but the good part is that if we do it at 15 years, by year 10, we will have so much data concerning this business through our registration that the picture will be very clear and there'll be plenty of time to change that. So I personally don't oppose it. I'm not speaking for the work group because we haven't really discussed it, but I don't think it's damaging it at this point and gives plenty of room in this regulatory structure to either be changed by the data or be left alone. Thank you.
So in essence,
Yeah, when I think about it is it's setting expectations, like the 4 is setting expectations. If in the future, everyone's going to be the same, it's somewhat setting expectations over time. So there isn't a group that are grandfathered forever or believe they're going to be grandfathered forever. I think what the goal would be that it would all be that over time, the incentives would be everyone gets treated the same, so.
Madam Chair, Matt, were you thinking of this as a la carte provision, sort of like Article 3 was a standalone provision? Or to put this in somewhere tucked in the general bylaw?
I was thinking of putting it somewhere in here. I have it here, but I don't have it in the paper, like how to put it exactly there. I know the concept and I know the numbers, but I don't, where the best place to put it, how to write it.
And maybe that's a question, excuse me, Madam Chair, that's a question for John Giorgio, if he thinks that would be better set in its own article, or if there's under one of the lettered provisions to tuck it in somewhere.
Could we review exactly what Matt is proposing?
Matt, can I restate it to make sure that I've understood? Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
So I think what Matt's proposing is that the grandfathering have a sunset
Yes.
at a certain date and time. In other words, the grandfathered protection of all the other provisions of the bylaw to those we've just defined qualify for it would only be allowed that grandfathering or that protection for a period of X years, and then that would sunset. And
Just the 9 goes away. So here,
just the 9, not the multiple properties. Okay.
I'll give
I'm
you.
glad I said it out loud.
I'll give you, it goes away on sale. It goes
Yep.
away on sale anyway.
Okay.
But I'm saying if you retain it, I'll throw something out for suggestions for discussion because it could change, it could be lengthened at town meeting, but you couldn't shorten it. So if we go, 20 years and someone comes in to make it less, we won't be allowed to. So I would say 10 years and in year 6, we start taking one away. So you get the year, for this purpose and then let town meeting decide.
Well, you can't bind a future town meeting, Matt, right?
Well, but how do you sunset then, John? Because it wouldn't have to be a vote. If this was written to say that there's that your grandfather for 9, and at year 6, you go to 8, and year 7, you go to 7, and year 8, you go down 1 a year till everyone's at 4 by year 10. That it would be written that way. That would be the rule. That would be the expectation. And now if the data told us you had to do something different, maybe town meeting votes and does something different, but that would be one way to do it.
David Iverson again, I'm sorry. Matt, are you referring to the 9 weeks or are you referring to grandfather?
No, I'm talking.
I mean,
about the
9 contracts are grandfathering.
I'm talking about grandfathering. Yeah, I'm talking the grandfathering.
So
going away.
now instead of grandfathering those uses until the property is sold, we're gonna sunset the grandfathering?
That's
now
what I'm
instead?
talking about. I'm saying I would say sunset in X amount of time and treat everyone the same. That would deal with some of Malcolm's issues.
Yeah, I don't think that we as a group would agree with that. I think we our first principle was to do no harm, and even though you're giving these people time, I don't think it's fair, and I don't think that that is how we operated as a group. I think that the grandfathering on the 9, or the sunset on the 9 is definitely something to talk about over a great period of time, but I'm concerned that when we start sunsetting the grandfathering, that it gets away from what we all worked on. Thank you.
And part of the reason I'm proposing it is there's the other side of the equation where there's people who are dealing with, 2 houses either side of them that is constant. And so, and there's a fairness issue. If some people get it and 30 years now, they still have it. One of the things I've heard from some of the real estate agents is there'll be a disparity. These will be worth this and these will be worth that. So anyway, that's one way to deal with it.
But they're not worth it to a buyer because those all go away on sale. There's no value in the resale because it resets to the same rule for everybody if the property's
Matt,
sells.
we've also passed nuisance bylaws, which should resolve that problem with those houses next door.
Curtis.
Curtis Barnes. I just want to be sure that you're not taking away the 9 rentals that I've been doing for 40 years. You are taking them away?
I would in this, if we did it this way,
Well,
it
then,
would be yes.
no, thank you.
Jim.
Jim Sulzer. First of all, yes, I think we should only be talking about possibly changing the number of contracts or changeovers per high season. We shouldn't be talking about any of the rest of the grandfathering provisions. We felt that was a pretty core issue of fairness. And so we don't think we should change that. As far as I certainly understand what Curtis just said. I understand what Matt is saying. And I understand that Matt is worried that things can be made larger at town meeting, but not smaller. But 10 years seems too short to me, Matt. It just doesn't seem fair. And again, this is a gut feeling, like you've talked about. Maybe 15, maybe 18, but 10 just feels, no, it just doesn't feel fair. That's all. That's my feedback. It's very unscientific.
Okay. Other board members? I want to get a sense of where we're at and whether we should pursue this. I'm of 2 minds. I would be okay with removing the 9 contracts after a fairly substantial period of time, but leaving the rest of the grandfathering in place. Future town meetings can look at the data and decide whether to amend this to achieve some of the things you're talking about based on actual really hyper-local data. So I'm kind of 2 minds but I understand the concern that won't happen.
Yeah, and
right? So
what I'm
putting
trying to
it-
do is signal to the people who are concerned that are dealing with this and are very concerned and coming to be against it. I'm trying to signal that this won't, maybe it won't be in their lifetime, but at some point that it will be, this won't be a permanent. Yeah, it won't be an every summer occurrence,
Okay. So,
where it's all summer.
yeah, Matt, any input?
Without trying to guess a measurement or what happens, but it seems to me that putting in a clear expectation that at some point you're going to remove that grandfathering would achieve a goal of addressing the scenarios that are grandfathered, corporate and multiple ownership, without directly addressing it, because those are going to be the types of ownership scenarios that are going to be less interested in fewer, whereas someone might keep a home and just rent it partially, not make as much money, but it does seem to work towards the goal that Matt wants without forcing those to be removed. And it gives people a clear timeline upon which they might have to make a sale, and gives it enough timeline over which they could start to look at it.
So you're talking about just the number of contracts, not the other provisions?
Yes, if
Yeah.
you just grandfather, if you just sunset the 9 to say 4 for the sake of this conversation, I think it does influence the things you're talking about addressing without specifically calling those out, which I think is a higher risk and harder to pass. That's just the way I see that.
Okay, so John?
So just to be clear, I think where Matt's proposal would go is not in the grandfathering section, but in subsection L, which says 9 changes, 9 times, nine changes of occupancy. I could add a sentence there that would say that will be in effect for X number of years. And thereafter, the change in occupancy shall be reduced by 1 each year until it's reduced to 4, something like that. But this is not really a grandfathering issue. This is a sunset provision on the 9 changes in occupancy.
The availability of 9 contracts to anyone.
Yes.
I have someone at the mic, and then I have Rick Atherton online.
Yeah, I have a clarifying question.
If you please could identify yourself.
Vincent Everts from Amsterdam. We come here every year for the last 50 years. I have a clarifying question. If we would sell our house, then it would go from 9 to 4, right? Correct. And that would last for 5 years, and then it would go back to 9, or would it stay at 4? So if that's the case, wouldn't that be already an incredibly stabilizing force? Would that be just making everything, your fear of going from 2 to 4 to 6,000, would that take everything away? That's my question.
It's similar.
Yeah, and we've already removed the return to 9 after 5 years, so that's out from an earlier.
I think it's similar.
Motion. Okay, so anyone want to propose something for us to debate and vote on at this point? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Rick Atherton's online. I'm sorry, forgot for a second. Erica? Mr. Atherton, if you want to unmute, you've been given permission. Okay, why don't we? He must have walked away, or, okay, so let's hold. Okay, Ron Cocott. Go ahead, Mr. Cocott.
Yes, hi, Ron Cocott, a 40-year seasonal resident of the island. I think reducing the number of contracts from 9 to 4 over time for the existing homeowners, assuming this is whether you're a resident or seasonal, doesn't matter, is directly contradictory to the very first purpose and intent of the short-term rental work group, which is do no harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a specific proposal from any of the board members at this time? I'm going to move us, try to close this section out.
I'll make a motion to do it in 20 years. And in year 16, take 1 away each year.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second for discussion, at least.
Okay. So I'm inclined to wait on this and allow town meeting to look at data and analyze what's happening in the market before we add this provision, because of the do no harm intent. So that's where I'm at, unless somebody can persuade me otherwise.
Madam Chair, John, could we put this in as a separate article? And if it were approved as a separate article, have it tucked back into provision L?
Yes,
Or you could put it in.
but I have to caution, I have to caution all of you that you can put this provision in, but in year 5 or 10 or any time, town meeting could amend this bylaw and change this.
Yeah, they-
There's no way to bind a future town meeting.
Okay.
And I also would caution the board about putting something in here that is going to have the practical effect of meeting a real roadblock at town meeting. Because I think this would be, if I were a homeowner, I would say this is pretty draconian to put this in. And so I'm going to vote against the whole thing. I'm just saying it's, I think you need to think about this carefully.
So we have a motion that's been seconded. Prepared to take a vote? I'm going to do it by roll call. Matt?
Aye.
Malcolm?
Aye.
Tom?
No.
And I'm going to vote no. I'm going to leave it up to future town meetings, I think.
It doesn't.
What do we have left? Matt?
So we had a request from Nantucket Together to move the grandfathering provision M up to the top. So it would come before H. And that, of course, would change the numbers. And I think the rationale, as I understood it, was when folks are reading this bylaw, they read H through L, and oh my God, this is horrible. And then they read the grandfathering provision. I'm just saying, I'm not endorsing that thought, but that was something that was raised.
Mr. Schaefer.
Peter Schaefer's former short-term working group. The reason we did that is because people don't read anything. And let's be smart here. It's, keep it simple, stupid. And we want to make this thing as easy for people to understand as possible. And the biggest question we have when we come out of these meetings, people rush us out on the street. What about this? What about that? Well, the most important part is for them to know that they're grandfathered. And if they're grandfathered, they can rest. And there's other rules that are going to come down the road, but they're not going to be subject to any draconian rules that are going to possibly happen.
So does that mean you're in favor of this proposal? I'm seriously asking the question, Mr. Schaefer. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be clear. Okay. Thoughts from the board?
Motion to approve, moving it up.
Is there a second?
That's fine.
Okay, so second from Matt. We're voting just moving the grandfathering far to the beginning so people see their protection before they see what the rules are. Yeah. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Okay, great. Next, John?
Okay, now we're at the purpose and intent section. And I know Matt has some comments, but I would just say that in number 6.
John, we need you to face your microphone, please.
Sorry, I apologize. Sorry about that. Kathy Baird has recommended in number 6 in purpose of intent that all the language after short-term rentals be deleted. She suggests removal of that to be in keeping with the others that do not make claims about cause and effect and also have no definitive data to support the claim. Such a claim could be controversial, divisive, and impact voters who read it in a negative way. The STR work group was divided on this, so this suggestion is left to the town to decide.
Questions from the board on this?
Madam Chair, I think that should stay in. I think we're really underestimating the amount of housing we're losing the short-term rental. Again, there's 450 some properties that are not owner occupied. I know of 2 sales in the last month to they weren't necessarily corporations, but essentially where the houses will now become short-term rentals. We have only 30% of our houses are lived in year-round on this island. There is a great potential for this island to become ultimately nothing but short-term rentals or more short-term rentals, depriving us of housing. I think that statement needs to be in there.
Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would say that these provisions were put in, John, I don't know if I have the right word here, but as a preamble to bolster the overall case, if you will, to the Attorney General's office for approval. And these were considered at great length by our work group and were vetted by counsel and Judy Barrett as well. And I think it should stay. I think it should stay as long as town council agrees that that there's no issue with number 6.
Yes, I don't think there's an issue with number 6, Tom. And really, whenever you're drafting this kind of controversial legislation, which may be legally challenged, it's important to have legislative history to show the purpose and intent and the rational basis for why the town acted the way it did. And that's the purpose of the purpose section.
If I may, yep, John.
John Kitchener, former short-term rental work group member. I won't say everything that Thomas just said, but I agree with all of that. And I do not think we ever formally voted on this as a group, actually. And so I don't think it's appropriate to take it out. I do believe it should stay in.
Thank you. My comment is that, and my question to John would be, does this bolster the rational argument if we were to further restrict short-term rentals with a change in the bylaw? And I believe that as a rational reason, I mean, my only compromise is to say which may have rather than which has as a compromise. But I'm fine with it staying in as well.
Does the data tell us one way or the other? No.
No.
Is that?
Yeah.
This isn't, we didn't Matt Haffenreffer. Thanks. This isn't something we went specifically into trying to unpack and look at each transaction, whether or not, but on anything that moves over time, nothing stays the same. Things either go up or they go down. And I haven't heard anyone make the case that we're gaining year-round housing due to short-term rentals. So I would say it feels accurate to say that we're losing year-round housing in that we're not gaining them. So I wouldn't say to what extent, but I don't see any reason to believe that we're gaining year-round housing at greater than the rate that we're losing it at.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter Halley. I think the idea of putting the word may in makes it more accurate. I know in the cases that John referred to earlier, this issue of causation has come up because other places have put this kind of thing in their statute, and the courts have, as far as I know, uniformly, and I think that's only 2 courts, found that there is not a sufficient connection between the two. I think we all know someplace out there is an inkling of a connection, but it's not a causation factor. It's just part of the whole big picture. And so the word may, I think, more accurately describes the actual situation. And by the way, just by saying it doesn't make it so. I know everybody has a very strong belief in this area, but strong beliefs don't necessarily mean that you have a rational reason for doing something.
And we may be able to discern that through data collection going forward more accurately than with the data that's available as well.
Yeah,
If we're deliberate about it.
I think common sense tells you it's happening when there, Hinsdale Road and, when there's short-term rentals on Hinsdale or on Newtown or, on Rugged, that's telling me where it's coming and where it's heading. So it's common sense tells me it's happening. Maybe we can't 100% prove it, but
John, does the change to May have any impact on its providing the rational basis for?
Yes, I think it weakens the rational basis.
Okay. Okay.
And there's no reason why you can't rely on anecdotal evidence to support that statement.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay. I am then, based on John's feedback, willing to leave it as is.
leave it as is.
Do we have consensus on the board? So there's consensus on that, Erica, to leave it as is? Yes. Remove the strikeout. Yeah.
Okay, before we get to the really big one, which is Article 1, Matt, you had a comment about making it clear that the information contained on the registry is a public record, and that the app, which I believe it is, by the way, Matt, I don't think you have to say that unless you want to do it for some other intent and purpose.
no, no, John, if it is public and there'll be a, way to access it online or your yearly reports.
Yeah.
That's fine. I've got, I've heard about, Ketchum, Idaho, and how that has had an impact on people doing bad things because they don't want their name associated with it. So I think I think the person who's the natural person should be listed. And this is all like data stuff that should be figured out when we do it.
I
But
think-
first, all that stuff should be listed and open.
And my recommendation, Matt, is that that be put in the regulation, in the regulations that are going to define more closely the application requirements. So I would recommend that we not put it in the bylaw, but we put it in the regulations.
If I may interrupt this conversation for a second, I'm going to propose that we postpone the appointments for 3 weeks, because I want to really do this thoroughly because time is up. And I think it's going to go on a while longer because there's a major topic we haven't touched on yet. So I want to release the people who have, I'm sorry, you've been here all this time, but would you rather stay through the end of this or come back in 3 weeks?
3 weeks.
Alan?
Alan Reinhardt. I'm up for the Cemetery Commission. We've already not been able to have an August meeting. We have scheduled the July meeting. We've scheduled the August meeting for the 23rd. So if we don't do these tonight, we won't be able to have a second month of meetings.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be respectful.
How about this? Can we just hold this for
Can we
3
hold this and
minutes,
do that?
vote all the non-contested and then come right back?
I'm going to propose that we do that. We take the non-contested seats and just do a motion right now. And I want to take anything and everything off the agenda that we can, because we're already at 8
Yeah.
o'clock and I'm not going past 9.
I'll make a motion to approve all the non-contested seats.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously, and we will, I believe that with the town council study committee, we actually, before we even do that appointment, we want to define the seats now that we have the level of interest is what's been discussed internally. And then we have the planning board seats, so we will do those on September 6th.
Yeah, so it's just there's one that we'll have to do. Yeah.
We will also be removing if this is okay with the rest of the board, committee reports tonight. And,
Can we suspend this
do we want
and do
to
the public hearings?
do we want to postpone the public hearings to a date certain? Okay, well, that's why I'm doing this now. I didn't know how long this would go,
Yeah.
but we're 2.5 hours into the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can we just
sure.
bang them out?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, we're gonna jump to public hearings. Number one, this is a utility petition for 16 Nobadeer Avenue.
I don't, I,
Tim, you're up if you're listening.
I don't see any, I don't even know if I need to hear from it. There was no,
Yeah, I don't have. any
staff had no issues on it. I'll move approval.
Okay, first you have to close the public hearing.
Motion to close
Close
the
it.
public hearing.
Second,
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Most, that carries unanimously.
motion approved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh my God, you
That
guys are
carries
so fast, I can't
unanimously.
even write it down.
Sorry, sorry, Matt.
Yeah.
Matt and Brooke.
Next, we will open the public hearing for 307 Polpis Road utility petition.
I'll move to close, I'll move to approve it. Before, but I have to close, I've got.
You have to close the hearing.
I'd like
I
close
move
it
to
first.
approve, I move to close the hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now I move
Carries
to approve.
unanimously.
Oh,
Second.
what's the
Matt moved
public
to
comment?
approve. Brooke seconded.
Wasn't that-
There's no one coming up to talk about this. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That carries unanimously. Third public hearing is 2 Polpis Road. I'll open that.
Move to open.
Second,
You mean move to close?
I mean, move to close this one.
All those in favor?
second,
Aye.
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 Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
aye.
Aye. And any of these with conditions will be approved with
Yes.
the staff conditions. And last, we have Milk Street.
Move to open the
Oh,
hearing.
it's open.
Oh,
Close it.
move to close. Is anyone here for it? Move to close it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That carries unanimously. Motion to approve.
So moved. Motion approved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Don, Ross and Tim, you guys are all set.
And thank you for
Thanks for
waiting.
being
with
here.
Apologies from us.
We'll also remove review of upcoming agenda items. We can do that next
Yep.
time.
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay. Okay, and with apologies for the length of this to everyone, but I think it's really important we do this thoroughly. I hope my fellow board members agree.
Madam Chair,
Yes, John.
so I'm trying to just keep track of everything here. I think Matt had made a reference to potentially changing some of the statements in the purpose and intent. Are you still wanting to do that, Matt?
No.
No, we
No, we-
by consensus, we chose not to make
Well
that
said.
change.
To make no changes?
Correct.
Okay. I thought that was only related to number 6, so, but it's for all of the purposes and intent.
Right. We're leaving the purposes alone.
Leave them alone.
Okay, so then, I believe the only outstanding issue is Article 1 zoning.
Can I, before that,
I'm sorry, John, Matt Haffenreffer has something to say.
Oh.
He's asking to speak. Go ahead, Matt.
you've a few times said name of owner, and I think it's really important that you're very clear that it's names of all owners, because that's one of the challenges in determining multiple ownership and having clarity on the ownership documents and who all this is associated with. I would be just both clear in the language as well as, of course, in the data gathering requirements, but consistency and having that the same throughout, I think is really important. And we've been less exact on that up until now.
And I believe John advised that that would be determined within the
regulations.
by us, would be defined by us,
Okay.
those things, not
Yeah.
through this warrant article. So,
Thanks.
yep.
Madam Chair, just remind you, Mr. Atherton is.
His hand has been up. He didn't respond.
Rick, are you there?
Madam Chair, I am here.
Okay, we offered you an
lost you.
opportunity to speak and we didn't get a response, so I just thought your hand was stuck up.
Well, I think you're close to being correct. I think I stepped out of the room for a short while and came back and missed your opportunity. So thanks for recognizing me. I just thought I would want to share an observation for your whole discussion. I sense a lot of viewers may have the same concern that I do. Many of your comments by each of you start out with "it's my understanding" or such language. And I think attempting to do all these regulations and correct the bylaw and many changes on one night is really a poor way to deal with your responsibilities. Sorry to be so direct, but until you come to some rational conclusions and people watching or coming to town meeting can really understand what you're trying to accomplish, I think you're better off to postpone the whole discussion of this article. It's too detailed. The details are in those sections in the general bylaws and even within other areas of the zoning. And I think when people recognize they can't really understand the totality of what you're doing, except by picking out, for example, one section that applies to them, chances are most people will recognize when I don't understand what I'm voting on, I will vote no. And I think that's what's likely to happen until you have some clear understanding between all of you and the community as to what you're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, would you like me to sort of tee up this last, I think
Yes.
it's really the last issue.
Yes,
And
please.
it goes, so we've saved the best to last, of course. It goes to the heart of the issue that, by the way, has been discussed over several meetings recently. Since then, I've had discussions with various people, including Matt and Dave Iverson and Judy Barrett, who I believe is now on the line. So that's fantastic. I also had a discussion today with the Attorney General in charge of the Municipal Law Unit and with Leslie, the Plus Director. And I think certainly in terms of town staff and consultants and me, we are recommending that the zoning amendment be in accordance with what the work group has recommended, so that it would be a Y designation. However, the point that really has to be made tonight and over the next couple of months is it's not opening the floodgates to short-term rentals, because you will only be an allowed use as a short-term rental if you are in compliance with the general bylaw regulations. So if let's take a scenario, you have not 10 changes in occupancy in July and August. That's a violation of the general bylaw, for which, by the way, you can be assessed a civil penalty of up to $5,000. Perhaps more importantly, you lose your protected use status under the general bylaw. So I think the fears that you will never be able to go back again are somewhat misguided. And I don't think the way this is structured, that you're going to lead to an unbridled expansion of STRs, because it ignores the plain language in Article 1 that says STRs is a use allowed by right. It's a Y use only if it complies with the general bylaw regulations contained in Article 2. So you have enhanced enforcement mechanisms. You have the ability to amend the general bylaw in the future in order to react to unforeseen circumstances or changes in the market. But at any one point in time, if you are operating a short-term rental in violation of the general bylaw, it is not an allowed use under zoning. There were some discussions, Matt. I don't know if you're still interested in putting all of these regulations into the zoning bylaw. It's not something that any of us would recommend because of grandfathering issues, the difficulty of amending a zoning bylaw in the future, and the fact that if you do that, you are going to foreclose the ability of the town to regulate this by general bylaw in the future. And Judy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you're fine. I'll help if I need to, but I'm with you on this, so I'll just wait unless I'm needed.
Right. And by the way, my discussion with the Attorney General is similar to the one that Judy had several months ago, where she has told us that the approach the work group is taking, tying the general bylaw regulations to the allowed use under zoning, is perfectly fine. So barring some unforeseen issue that might occur at town meeting, I think that the approach that the work group has proposed here is more than likely to be approved by the Attorney General.
Thank you, John. Matt?
First question, John. If in a year or two, we decide we want to take the Y out of the use chart and we'd like to define it in there, can we do that?
Could you amend the zoning bylaw to make it, for example, an accessory use?
Yes, once we put a Y in, can we then
Yes.
make an accessory use later?
Yes, you could. Of course, whether you enact Article 1 in its present form or amend it in the future, it's zoning. So you have grandfathering protections. They're statutory grandfathering protections.
All right, so what would that mean if a Y in there and we try to make it accessory? Does that mean everybody that's existing under whatever scheme we come up with now is then grandfathered under that scheme?
If they are a prior existing legal non-conforming use, they're protected. That's correct, Matt.
Right, and that's sort of my concern.
Yeah, I know, but we also have the grandfathering provision in the general bylaw. So, but
So there's number one. Number two, second question, John. We were talking about linking, so we could require a 2/3 vote. Both of them be voted in the future for forever. Is that still in this a possibility, or is this going to be a 50% vote?
So, Matt, I tried very hard to come up with a way to accommodate that request. And if I led you down the wrong path, I apologize for that. But the more I thought about it and ruminated, and more importantly, to talk to Judy, talk to Leslie, I don't think that's a wise way to go, because what you would want to do is to freeze the general bylaw as it exists today and say you're an allowed use only if you comply with the provisions that are adopted on September 7th. And so I think it might be legal to do that, but I think it would be a disaster from an administrative standpoint. I think enforcement would become very, very difficult. And I think it would be confusing because 10 years down the line, maybe none of us are going to be around. I mean, involved with the town. So I just don't recommend it, Matt. I don't see it.
My point isn't to freeze it as it is, John. My point is to find a way to require a 2/3 vote so that we do not get a lot of, in the future years, this year and future years, a lot of packing the hall, trying to get personal interest and, pack the hall and get the 50% and then it's gone.
I
Yes,
understand.
That's my biggest concern, John. We
I
did it with the
understand.
and you know how we did it with the sewer and it has worked. So.
No, I understand that, Matt, but the trend in municipal government now is to make it easier to amend zoning bylaws than more difficulty. You have the housing choice laws now. If you propose a zoning bylaw that promotes affordable housing, it's a majority vote. It's not a 2/3 vote. The bottom line is the voters who show up town meeting, although actually in the future, maybe in 3 years from now, you may have a totally different form of government. You may not have a town meeting anymore. And it would be up to, I apologize. It would be up to, a town council of 9 or 13 members to make these decisions. So, it's always going to require at least a majority vote. And if you're not comfortable with that, then that is a reason, that's a legitimate reason to oppose this approach. But I'm not sure I can come up with a better approach for you at this point. I know I can't.
Dave?
Hi, Dave Iverson again, former member of the work group. Listen, Matt and I have been around and around and around on this. At one point, we thought we'd come to an agreement. John was there. It fell apart. I feel strongly that what Matt is trying to accomplish really kind of goes against the principles of town meeting and democracy, and that, the state of Ohio tried it recently. Luckily, they failed. That any of us have a concern and that a policy should be created around that concern that is very difficult for a majority of this town to override, I think is in principle wrong. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Hi, Caleb Worston. I just want to say I totally agree with Matt that it should be an accessory use, because if you make it by right, you're certifying a business model. And I think that goes against, what we're trying to do with affordable housing on the island. And I think that encourages off-island investment into short-term rentals. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we're at a point where, just any other comments from other board members first? Okay, and so is there a concrete proposal that you want us to vote on, Matt, or?
Well, this is where it gets difficult, because we're backed into a corner. I don't think that this is going to pass again at town meeting with a Y in the use chart. I think we've done a ton of good work. I think the changes here are good. I still think I just worry that it's not going to. What Dave and I were talking about was doing basically all of this and having an A and referencing it, having an A in the zoning and referencing it in the zoning to be able to do everything else that we're trying to do. And I think that had a very good chance of passing, and I would stand up and wholeheartedly support that. I think even with, a couple of changes I didn't get tonight, I would support that. I think that doing it this way, I don't think it's going to pass. I know this, one of the fears is that the lawsuits with Act Now will continue. And one of the comments in what we had here said that, that they're against any short-term rental type in the districts. That's not true. They're against, they're not opposed to them in an accessory manner, which is what we've sort of gone to. If we get to 4, that's an accessory manner, and they're not opposed to that. So I don't think that they are the legal concern we have going forward. I think the legal exposure we have for the town in the future is corporate and multi-use family type of things, corporate, individual, multi-use families. Like, and I think what they'll do is they will challenge this on commerce basis. I think they'll challenge that they're being looked at differently than natural persons. And we can say, okay, mass law says you're allowed to separate them and everything's gonna be fine. My concern is that is gonna be the challenges we're gonna face. And that's going to come either from individuals, representing them and coming to town meeting with changes to try to fix it, for them, or it's gonna come through the courts like it did in Austin. And so that is my biggest concern. And I think if it was in zoning, that's concern would be lessened for me. So anyway.
Dave? And then I'm gonna I'm gonna
I'll
take
make
this
it
as the last public comment. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And listen, Matt and I really tried hard to make it work. And I think that for me, the real problem is that the accessory use adds more ambiguity to our zoning bylaw, which creates a situation that we're trying to resolve here. And I think that the accessory use piece, as far as our zoning bylaw, has to be an accessory to the dominant use. And that's where the problem is. You say four contracts is an accessory use, but it's only really considered an accessory use if someone lives in their house for 5 weeks before those 4-week contracts come up. So the way our bylaws work. So that's really my problem, because we really worked hard to come together on this. And I just felt personally that by adding more ambiguity to the zoning bylaws surrounding STRs isn't resolving anything. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. So Tom?
Madam Chair, I was just going to say, John, is it, you presented to the short-term rental work group multiple times, but specifically on the corporate provisions that were used from the town of Great Barrington, and in the Attorney General's written opinion on that, if I remember correctly, you stated that the Attorney General went to great length to make sure that was done on a rational basis and would prove muster through a higher court at the time. So am I correct in my remembrance that per your presentation to us, that we were on, at the moment, pending any other legal cases, on pretty firm legal ground with the Great Barrington definitions?
Well, Tom, that is an accurate statement of what I said to the work group, but I'm not going to stand here today and tell you that your corporate prohibition would withstand a legal challenge. The Attorney General approved that bylaw in a very lengthy analysis, and she went through with great care why there was a rational basis, why it did not violate equal protection, why it did not violate substantive due process. But in the end, it's still subject to a legal challenge. And, yeah, there are great arguments to defend it. The statute itself says you can regulate by classes of ownership, but I cannot give you a guarantee that it would withstand a legal challenge. We would be fully prepared to defend it. But that's all I can say. Now, something like that, it would be probably what would happen is that particular provision about no corporate ownership would be stricken if a court found it unconstitutional, without upsetting the rest of the bylaw, because we were careful to put in a severability clause.
Right. In which case, if that happens, then our corporate restriction is gone.
Yep.
And potentially they go out, like, so let's pretend that there's a corporate owner downtown that has a bunch of rooms that are condos that also are rented out, right, all summer and right through the fall and everything else. Let's pretend that we have that and they are not happy with this, and they have a lot of resources to.
Well, no, Matt.
And they've used it that way for 40 or 50 years, and they have a lot of resources. Someone like that might challenge it. And
No,
say,
but
"I've
Matt,
rent more than 9," and so
we're only talking about the prohibition against corporate ownership of STRs. even if that was struck down, all the other provisions in the bylaw, the limitation of 9 rentals, that applies to all short-term rentals, including corporations.
I understand, John. There's two issues. One is if the corporate is struck down, then any corporate can own, correct?
Yes, but they would be
Okay, if it's
subject to
struck
the other
down in the-
provisions of the bylaw that survive.
All right, and if they if a corporate owner or another owner challenges the 9 rentals per summer season, and that is struck down, then that is no longer, or the 4. Let's say they go after the 4, then that isn't.
I'm much less worried about those being struck down than I am about
okay.
the corporate ownership.
All right, thank you.
Okay, do we have a specific ask or request of this group right now on this particular issue?
Yeah,
To consider?
I wish that what Dave and I were working at the other day was still on the table. So I wish that there was a way to tighten it under the corporate, under the zoning bylaw for this. That's what I mean, it clearly, that changed and that can't be done. So I mean, I could vote that and then they're gonna say not to do it and, and it's not probably gonna pass. It's gonna be another 2-2. So I don't know.
So, without anything for us to actually take a vote on or consider in terms of changing, we have now before us the articles as amended by discussion so far and by votes so far this evening, and the rest of the warrant to consider. So, Matt?
Question going forward, if we find that is there a chance to amend this at the FinCom or at the planning board? Or if we vote this in this way, no matter what? If we find that there is legal exposure and that could be covered, can that be amended at one of those points? Because I still think there's some work that should be done in looking into this aspect itself, so.
So Matt, the answer to that question is a qualified yes. Subject, of course, to the moderator's determination that whatever amendments you come up with are within the scope. Not that they're less restrictive, that's really a misnomer. The question is, are they within the scope? Were the voters adequately warned in the warrant that a motion would be made? And I can't answer that question or advise the moderator without seeing specific changes that the FinCom may want to make or the planning board may want to make in their recommendation. They're somewhat more constricted because, the bylaw is advertised for the public hearing. And the question is, can the planning board come up with a motion that changes what was advertised? And it's the same kind of analysis, correct, Judy? Whether it's within the scope.
Yes, agreed.
But so that's a qualified yes, Matt.
Well, I don't think it's gonna happen at the planning board level. It'd have to happen at FinCom. And we would have to direct staff or John to find a way to write it so it's in the zoning. If we want, if as a board, we wanted it to be in the zoning, but.
I personally support where it's at right now, so. So here we are. We have a thus far amended set of warrant articles. If discussion on the short-term rental section of the warrant is complete, then I will turn the meeting back over to Don.
Before we do that, though, Brooke.
Yep, John.
So this is going to be a pretty complicated rewrite of this bylaw.
Yep.
And I am reluctant to advise the board to just approve the warrant subject to the rewrite without seeing it.
Okay.
And I know that is that adds a complexity here because I do not believe you have a meeting next week. I mean, I can try to turn this around as fast as possible. But I guess maybe the way to do it is if any board member is not happy with the way I've changed it before the warrant is signed, then maybe we have to do a reset of some kind. And potentially call a special meeting to hash out any changes. It's too.
John, if necessary, we'll call a special meeting.
Okay,
We
so
don't
I
have
will,
another meeting until the 6th.
okay, so I will prepare this, get it to you as soon as possible. And if anybody, you can then make a decision whether a special meeting is needed or not. Okay,
Okay, so can we make a motion to approve the warrant pending concerns with the alterations?
Or should we just call a meeting for Wednesday? Next Wednesday? Just, I know that's not ideal.
So I've already booked this room just in case from noon on for next Wednesday. NCTV is already on, or we can do it remotely.
What is going to be different between now and next Wednesday?
It's the opportunity to review the rewritten language, I think.
Which you
before
don't
we
have
adopt the
right now.
warrant.
Yep.
That's the purpose.
Yes, so we do need that.
What exactly is being rewritten?
Just the amendments that we've agreed to.
Oh, well, we've already discussed.
Yeah, the ones
Okay.
we've already discussed, yeah.
All right.
So we may or may not need this meeting
Because those
if
seem,
everyone has read the drafts and they're fine with that.
Yeah.
why don't I get you the
yeah, that's
rewrite?
gonna be all new.
Madam Chair, why don't I get you the rewrite by Friday? At the latest, I'll try to
So
get
we
it.
had time to call the meeting.
Yeah, so if there are any concerns at that point, you can call a meeting or just decide to go forward with, actually signing the warrant. Whereas if you vote that tonight, you can commit at any time to sign the warrant.
Libby?
I was just gonna say, I've been trying to keep track of the changes a little bit. They don't seem substantive to me, but I'm not on the board, so I don't know if they're substantive to you all. And we do need to move this along a bit because we have publication to do and that takes time and people are gonna be out and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to see what the most straightforward thing to do here is.
Can I propose that John sends the draft to all of the board members? And if any board member brings a concern to me, I'll call the meeting.
Okay, maybe we should just post the meeting. Because we're gonna have outages of employees.
No.
Coming up
Okay,
and
we can cancel it. Can we just do it on Zoom?
Mhm.
And can it be earlier than noon? I'm gonna have to move something. But
The room's available or the. If it is 100% by Zoom, I think we can probably accommodate any time.
okay. Does everyone want to look at their schedules real quick? Could you do like 11?
The 23rd, next Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm fine.
In order to get it into next week's newspaper, my deadline is essentially Friday, Saturday at the absolute latest, so we're already potentially pushing that back. Yeah, but it's possible to put it in the following week's newspaper. Yeah. I'm just saying the chances of it going in next week's newspaper aren't really, seems like it's not gonna happen. Yeah, I think we're just gonna plan to put it in the newspaper the following week. It'll be on
That's-
the
I don't think that's,
first.
I don't think that's really an issue.
So if I may, Don, so what we're saying is we will be adopting the motion subject to revisions by town council. We will be supplied the revised draft on Friday. If none of us has a concern, we'll sign it and it'll be adopted. And if anyone does have a concern and wants to meet, we will have posted a Zoom meeting for next Wednesday
At
that we can
11,
cancel.
if that's okay with
Yeah,
everybody.
11 o'clock is fine with me.
11 o'clock on the
If that's
23rd.
okay.
And one,
with the
one,
town
que-
manager and all the other board members.
one question,
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Mhm.
If there's an article or something in the package that the member does not necessarily support, then they would not sign.
Adopting the warrant doesn't mean you support everything on the warrant. As an individual,
As an individual, I had this problem the last time too.
adopting the warrant means that you're putting it to the voters to have their input at town meeting.
And if an individual member didn't want to do that, then they just wouldn't sign,
I suppose.
I suppose, if that was
That,
going to happen.
that is your choice.
But we can decide, we also can decide not to, like, we took 3 off took 3 off today. We can decide, on a vote to take things off or on. That's up to us.
Correct.
So there would not necessarily, without a meeting, an opportunity to vote on individual articles.
That's what we did all night tonight. Essentially, well, what you all did all night while I sat back there. But yeah, that's right. But if you're wanting to have a meeting, that's why we'll post one for next week.
All right, well,
Does that make sense?
Just in case.
that makes sense.
Okay.
Madam Chair, am I correct in thinking that it'd be very unusual to pull out any specific article and vote on it? It's usually done as a package. Is that correct?
Correct.
No, we've.
But we normally do go through it like tonight, and I mean, normally there's more that's being discussed rather than this
Yeah.
more.
No, we
pinpointed
have,
issue.
we have pulled out individual items and not brought them forward.
Right, but we could, if there's another article that's not one of these that's being redrafted, it should probably be raised tonight.
Madam Chair, I don't think there's any articles, excuse me, really thinking about this. The tradition is that we vote as a group to move the articles forward. And I think we should do that this time. We should have a meeting to do that this time. And if we have to have a special meeting, then we'll have a special meeting.
So you want to see the draft and you want to have a meeting before we vote.
I want the
essentially.
board to vote on moving the articles forward or not.
Well, isn't that what we're doing?
That's what
now?
we were doing, but subject to the
The
edits
revisions.
that you all just went through.
Then we haven't had a vote on that. We could have a vote on subject to review. We could do that right now.
Right. What we would be doing now is voting to adopt the warrant as amended tonight by the revisions that we made, subject to final review of language.
That's fine. So
Yeah.
we need to have that vote tonight.
Yes, that's what we were about to
Good.
do, right?
Yep.
And that's your
right.
motion, and who is seconding
That's my
that?
motion.
Who's seconding that?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes, unopposed.
All right, so we'll carry on. We'll get the language on Friday. That will be public, and if a board member wishes, we will have a meeting next Wednesday at 11 on Zoom. Okay.
I just want to be, I really hate this, but, so John,
Yes.
if a board member wants to discuss this at a meeting next week, the warrant is adopted. So would there need to be some sort of reconsideration? If somebody wanted to challenge something that you've changed or change it?
I think it's the warrant tonight. The motion's going to be to adopt the warrant as amended tonight, subject to final review by the select board members.
I thought this was more about that the language captured the intent,
Okay.
not
Gotcha.
about not
Changing.
adopting the warrant and not having a town meeting. Because essentially, if we didn't adopt the warrant, we
Right.
would be canceling the town meeting.
So it would be subject to the approval of the language to be drafted by town council.
That was my motion.
Madam Chair, I apologize for making it more confusing than it needed to be.
It's okay. We're all,
And just a comment on that, we're still gonna that when I was at the Sconset Civic Association, there was some strong opposition to sewering, Codfish Park and other at-risk areas from the group. And we will have, there are citizen articles, and we'll have a chance to decide whether to give them a 2/3 or a 50% threshold for town meeting,
Yeah.
and to give them a comment coming
Correct.
forward.
And they can come, I mean,
Yes.
it's a public hearing on September 13th. They'll have an opportunity to come here and speak.
But I just wanted to make that clear. That's not a done deal.
Madam Chair, I also suggested at one of the past meetings that you might want to consider having individual board members, if they want, put a comment, not on the warrant, but in the FinCom motion book, if they feel strongly about any of these articles, either in favor or against. So that is an option the board would have.
That a board, a single board member would give their own comment.
Well, you could do that. That, that really would be, I think, up to the select board, but this is a very unusual circumstance where you have such a divided board. I don't know if anyone would take advantage of that, but there's no way the board can really make a comment on the short-term rental articles if it's a 2-2 vote. So in that circumstance, you may want to consider allowing individual board members or the, majority and the minority report, something like that. So they have something to present to the voters if they so choose.
I mean, we don't normally make a lot of comments.
Right,
On,
correct.
on articles, because we leave that to the finance committee.
Correct.
And any member can certainly speak at town meeting,
And that
but
was
that
the-
would just be outside of what our practice has ever
Yeah,
been.
my comment is,
Matt?
we've always had the opportunity to go and speak as individuals in front of the finance committee or in front of, planning board. So we can continue to do that.
And,
If we want to make our case in writing, we can do that as well. I don't think that's inappropriate.
and at town meeting as well.
Exactly.
And obviously, in my case, just so that we're 100% clear, if I were to speak at either place, it would be as my interest as a citizen and not as a board member.
Correct.
I am only voting on adopting the warrant, not on the content of those articles. Okay. Can we move on to the final STR piece tonight about the short-term rental registration program?
Dawn, did you actually take the vote to adopt? the
yes,
warrant
we did.
Subject to language.
We did. It was 4-1.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. It was a little confusing. No, it's okay. We're all in, navigating this.
So the short-term rental registration program update, I would turn this to the finance director and potentially health director. We've had some discussions about changing vendors, and they're going to give a little.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Libby. So I know that Roberto and I have been working with Granicus, and we've been having numerous discussions with them, and the registry was supposed to be done many, many months ago. It's become abundantly clear as we've tried to navigate this process that Granicus doesn't understand what the town needs or is unable to fulfill it. And based on the conversation that the board had, I think near the end of July, about potentially having substantial progress by August 18th, when they canceled the training on July 26th and said essentially that there were some issues with the platform, that they weren't ready and they weren't comfortable with us actually being ready to start training. Roberto and I had a conversation, and essentially we made the recommendation, which is in the AIS, that we terminate the contract with Granicus. We've already had discussions with SHI and told them that we will be pursuing a substantial amount of refund for taxpayer dollars when we do ultimately terminate the contract. We have looked at one vendor already. We have proposed to the town manager that we establish a small group of about 5 people, Roberto, myself, Penny Dye has agreed to be on it, another real estate agent, Lisa Wynn, and then Kathy Baird, to seek out. We have 2 other vendors that we already know about that are in this platform and are in this space. The one that we have talked to already has told us that they could have it up and running, and they've given us 3 cities that they've already done this, and they've had it up and running in 9 weeks, converting from Granicus. The goal is next week to review at least 2, potentially 3 other vendors and have a recommendation and start the redeployment and have the members that are going to work with Roberto and I also be involved in the testing, working on the outreach so that we could essentially have this deployed potentially in November, but realistically to make sure that we test it properly, in my mind, to have it ready to be deployed for January 1st of 2024. But the first step is we've already discussed the potential termination with SHI and would be to formally notify them and start the process of hopefully getting and identifying a new vendor as quickly as possible to get this up and running. So I'm happy to answer any questions if any board member has them.
Questions, thoughts?
I think it's the exactly right thing to do. You know, I think we're no choice. Thank you for doing it. My only suggestion is make sure make sure that whoever we get can handle all the various data. And I would get some advice from Smart Matt, if he's willing to do it, or, you know, make sure that we have the right.
We're open to talking to anybody. I mean,
Yeah,
I want to make sure that we get this right. And I know Roberto does too. So
All right.
that's why we're here recommending this.
All right, thanks.
I concur that having a data consultant who's deep into the analytics and the gathering of information on short-term rentals and what we need to analyze this going forward needs to be input at the beginning of this so that we're collecting the data that we need. So I would support hiring Matt Process First to support that work.
I just have one question. I just want to confirm that what the state registry has is not adequate for our use.
State registry is very limited in what it has. It does not have any data. I know you were talking about it earlier. It has there's no availability for us to get what any of the people are, how long they're renting, or the intensity of the usage, or any of that data. So it's very limited in its use. It would be good for it to compare to make sure that we have everybody, if we've captured everybody, but other than that, in my mind, it would not help us in any way other than that.
Do we need a vote on that?
Yeah.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last up is the ratification of the vote from August 7th at the Joint Land Bank Commission Select Board meeting to designate Select Board members to Washington Street Long-Term Planning Work Group. Yeah, it would be Brooke and Matt.
So moved.
All those in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? That carries unanimously.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.